Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. On behalf of the Africa Program and the Project on Leadership and Building State Capacity, the two projects that I direct here at the Wilson Center, I'm Steve McDonald, your host today. We thank you very much for coming out on this beautiful day. We're still waiting for one of our panelists for this morning, who's in a taxi downstairs, I understand, and should be up momentarily. But we have limited time, so we're going to get underway. We're also being webcast today, so the webcast starts on time whether we do or don't. So we're looking kind of silly standing here. So to our webcast audience, our apologies, but we are underway now. So thank you very much. As you know, the Woodrow Wilson Center is a living memorial to former President Woodrow Wilson, who was our only president to have a PhD and of course was the president of Princeton University. So he had a very, very deep commitment to the need for intersection and interaction between the policy community and the community of ideas, as he called it. By that he meant academics, experts, practitioners in the field, those who were living and working those policy issues that people here in Washington sit and make great decisions about. So in that spirit, in that regard, we're very happy to be hosting this conference today. Now, you're probably aware that this conference that we are having this morning is actually sort of a two-part series on Somalia. We will be hosting President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud tomorrow at 1:30 as well. We had hoped to put them together on the same day, but his schedule wouldn't allow that. And so we're going ahead with the panel discussions today, sort of setting the backdrop. As you've seen from your agenda, we're looking at rebuilding Somalia's economy and finances, as well as at the security and governance situation in Somalia. And we've assembled quite a nice panel of experts to guide us through that. I want to give special thanks. I saw Stephen Lassiter here a moment ago. Special thanks to Congressman Keith Ellison and his staff, Stephen Lassiter in particular, because they were very instrumental in helping us put this together. They've been a very good partner in the doing of this. Of course, you know, Congressman Ellison comes from Minnesota, so he has a large constituency of Somalians, and he cares very deeply. And he recently traveled earlier this year to that country to meet the new president to look at the situation there. And so he's deeply engaged and involved, and he will be with us on tomorrow when the president's here, but couldn't be with us today. Okay, I'm not going to spend any more time in my introduction. We all know the gravity of the situation, the history of the situation in Somalia. We'll hear more about that now. It's a country we're all watching very closely with high hopes that it's going to be able to emerge from these years and years of turmoil. And we will get some insight into that this morning. I'm going to turn over the agenda now to my first moderator, Ambassador David Shin, who's an old friend of mine. We were in foreign service together, 37 years of government service, capped by ambassadorships to Ethiopia and to Burkina Faso, and he's currently the adjunct professor for international affairs at the Georgetown's Elliott School of International Affairs.
George Washington.
George Washington. Don't want to get that wrong. So thank you very much for your attendance here this morning. And David, will you take it over?
Thank you very much, Steve. We have a very distinguished panel this morning. We have agreed that each panelist will speak for about 10 minutes in order to allow maximum time for Q&A. And I'm pretty tough when it comes to time limits, so they will be getting little white slips from me if they start slipping beyond 10 minutes. I will introduce them individually as they speak. The first person to talk today is going to be Linda Eaton. She currently serves as a Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa at USAID, where she oversees the Office of Sudan and South Sudan programs and the Office of East African Affairs. Prior to joining USAID, she served at the White House, Director for Sudan, South Sudan, and East African Affairs from 2009 to 2012. She has a bachelor's from the University of Wisconsin in African Affairs, French, and Portuguese. Linda, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I just got back from Brussels about a day ago, and so I'm sort of in the optimistic spirit right now. coming out of the New Deal conference, and I'd be curious to hear about, so I'm not going to spend so much time talking as much as listening and hearing, I think, some of the comments and questions that everybody here might have today. I think it would be good to just sort of quickly recognize where we've come, I think, on Somalia, where we are as a U.S. government, and then just take some time to maybe look at what are some of the opportunities that are presented by this new spirit of optimism that we're seeing. First, I think that we wouldn't even be having this panel today if there hadn't been a lot of significant progress that had been made in Somalia over the past year. The end of the political transition, the election of President Hassan Sheikh, these are all monumental events. And while I know that it's really tempting to fall back into cynicism really quickly, especially when you're talking about complex environments, I still want to keep reliving and really focusing on some of the more optimistic turns. This progress wouldn't have taken place if it hadn't been for the dedication and commitment of a lot of the people who are sitting in this room, as well as around the world, and especially Somalis who are actually in the country right now, dedicated to building their communities, being innovative and creative about ways of getting money and opportunities to their communities, and the Somali diaspora community, which is one of the most vibrant diaspora communities that we have, both in the United States and around the world. The Somali people are in the process right now of transitioning from a war economy into basically a normal, regularized state for the first time in over 2 decades. Experience has probably taught us all that rebuilding after a conflict is not only a challenge for on the security side, it's not only a challenge of institutional capacity, but it's also a challenge of redefining what the relationship between the state and local society could be and actually is. We see this as sort of a fundamental part of what we're doing over at USAID. So some of you may have heard that while we were in Brussels, the United States just agreed to commit an additional $70,000, about $69 million, to support community stabilization, economic growth, security, democracy, and governance in Somalia. This is on top of the over $200 million a year, approximately, that we spend on Somalia already. Obviously, we are looking at how our support can be supportive of the New Deal principles that were laid out by the government of Somalia, but also to reinforce a lot of the gains that we've seen communities across Somalia make over the past few months. So we see the New Deal as presenting us with an opportunity to address a lot of the development priorities in Somalia. We think it can help to strengthen and enhance existing resiliencies, to make communities, institutions, and society as a whole better prepared for and really able to recover from shocks such as the drought and the famine that we saw in 2011 and 2012, but also as a capacity development and stabilization, but also as focusing on capacity development and stabilization projects. So looking at the New Deal framework as both an overarching frame for some of the quick impact projects that the donor community has been emphasizing over the past few weeks, and finding a way to link them up with some of the resiliencies and longer term economic opportunities that we actually know we have to move towards. So I know that I've just started with a lot of good words. I know that you're all sort of interested in understanding what all of this actually means in concrete terms. I also know that what I'm going to say may not provide you with all the satisfaction that you're hoping for, because I think that one of the approaches that we're looking at is really looking at local communities as being the drivers of this change. And what that means is it's a very messy process of getting down at the community level and actually defining needs at that level, and then working to link community needs with the central government in Mogadishu and making sure that those priorities are aligned and that they affect individuals in the most concrete ways possible. So just to sing our own praises, over the past few years, we've seen our programs helping tens of thousands of people enhance stability in their communities. We've increased access to education, health, some amounts of economic growth, and most of all, most importantly, I think security and supporting critical humanitarian needs. But we really see sort of the future growth of Somalia as being driven by the entrepreneurial Somali population, the young people who are going to be the drivers of economic growth, and the diaspora community who are serving as an innovative private sector in Somalia. So these are sort of partnerships that we're looking on building upon. So what we really think is that these actors need to be key partners for USAID as we work together to tackle barriers of economic growth and opportunity in Somalia. We know that the IMF has estimated that over half of Somalia's currency right now is counterfeit. We have multiple reports of corruption as consuming over 50 to 70% of the state's revenue. We know that even the Central Bank of Somalia has acknowledged that that currency remains out of its control right now. But even while there are these enormous challenges, I think there are enormous opportunities. We see that the government has already taken some really critical steps to get their economy on the right track. They recently revised their foreign investment law, which we think is an important first step. They've pulled together an impressive draft economic recovery plan, which we discussed in Brussels. They're working closely with donors to prioritize key quick impact projects that will stimulate growth. And we're looking at ways, we're having consultations with investors that are interested in actually focusing on Somalia for what are the main barriers they see to growth as well. Also, we know that sectors such as agriculture, livestock, and energy have huge potential in Somalia. And for that reason, and in an effort to harness this potential, we're working closely with the government and other key stakeholders to reduce critical barriers to investment in these sectors. So we're working with the Ministry of Natural Resources and the regional private sector to promote exports. We funded some demonstration farms and improved veterinary care of livestock and developed wind turbines. Some of these small-scale projects, which we think overall have concrete impacts in people's lives, even if they're not large-scale transformative projects at the moment. Obviously, we think that regional growth is important in linking Somalia to the rest of the region and continuing to make sure that it maintains close contact with Somaliland and all of the rest of its regions is critical, and therefore our activities have increased the ability, or that we're actually trying to increase the ability of regional governments to conduct outreach with their population and much needed social services, to collect revenue, to increase food and job security, through a lot of creative farm-to-market interventions through the use of our humanitarian assistance. In South Central Somalia, we have some youth-focused programs where we're focusing on training young people by improving job skills and finding some employment activities. And we know that improving job skills when you have a situation where there aren't a lot of jobs is a recipe for frustration. And we're working with a lot of the local communities to actually look at ways of how we can translate the vocational skills that we're training some of these young people in into actual concrete jobs there. We know that there are enormous challenges that remain. We know that security gains made by AMISOM and the national security forces are only going to be successful if Somalians actually make their process to economic recovery inclusive and actually solicit the input of both the diaspora community, but also concretely of the people and communities on the ground. So I've been given my warning. I'm gonna stop there and look forward to the conversation.
You actually have 3 minutes left, so
No.
feel free to take it.
That's fine.
Thank you very much, Linda. The next panelist is Hersey Suleiman. He joined Amal USA Inc., a money transmitting company based in Atlanta, in June of 2010 as Vice President and North American Regional Manager. He worked in the banking sector from 1992 to 2010. Suleiman graduated from Lincoln University in 1988 with a BS in Business Administration and then an MBA in 1992. Hersey, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I want to thank Wilson Center for inviting us to come here this morning to explore regarding the money service business in Somalia and the impact that the money transmitted has the economy, the political stability of Somalia, and the issue we have in a banking business here in the United States. As you all aware, as a Somalis or Somali descent, we always said Somalia has been in roller coaster country for 20-some years. And the only reason, or one of the main reasons that Somalia exists today is two things: the role women plays in Somalia and the remittance that flow to Somalia. As you all aware, no business can function without banking here in the United States. And the main reason we're here today is to increase awareness about the banking boycott that we're facing here in the United States. As you all know, remittances are legal, transparent, licensed business in the United States. We are regulated by IRS, Treasury Department, state regulations, regulators, and we are doing everything by the books and following all the rules and regulations, and we're in compliance. Remittances are not just the Somalia lifeline, they are also Somalia's development engine. Without the remittance, I think it has been several times repeated by experts that Somalia probably will not exist if there was no remittance. There are several remittance companies, and we all the same way that we work together. Much of the money that's not spent meet humanitarian aid in Somalia. It helps family to shelter, to food, kids to go to school, health. In addition to servicing remittance, all our companies we work with, both here in the United States and internationally in Somalia, are the primary mechanism for aid agencies, international organizations, NGOs. They all use money transmitters. As you're all aware, there's no banking system in Somalia that can work with international banks. So the money transmitters are the only way of money can flow in Somalia. And all the international organizations, USAID and others, use remittances. So it's important, very important, in order Somalia now and in the future to be politically, economically stable, that money remittance here in the US and all over the world to continue and function in a very, very transparent way. Somali American Money Service Association consists of 9 companies. Most of them are based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Columbus, Ohio, Seattle, Washington, Atlanta, Georgia, and other places where there are large population of Somalis. Our companies employed many people. My own company were employed at least 1,500 people in the United States, and most of the other companies are the same, if they are not more. Just imagine closing the doors for money transmitters tomorrow. How many people will be unemployed here in the United States, including myself and this other gentleman sitting in front of me? That probably will increase the unemployment rate here in the United States. We don't want that to happen. We're also people working back home in Somalia and all over the world because we have a very, very transparent system that connects from here, Somalia, somewhere in between, to make sure that everything we do is transparent, is accessible through regulators, both the state level and the federal level here in the United States, because we're here in the United States and we have to follow the rule of law here. And believe me, we do. We do everything we do by the books. Unfortunately, banks are not working with us. We do understand and we do respect. Banks are private entities. We know that. And being a former banker, they can say no. But for God's sake, if you have to say no, I hope you have a reason. So far, they're not giving us any reason why they're not working with us, except to saying we're high risky because of government regulations, because of OCC regulations, and so on, without further explanation. So we're hoping this kind of conference and others will bring some awareness of the situation and the issue we have with the banks here in the United States. I hope bank executives were here today. I really asked the Wilson Center to invite them, but I guess that did not happen. When banks close our accounts, none of those banks really give us any reason why they're doing that, except saying we're high risk. Keep in mind, we spend a great deal of time and great deal of money to make sure that we follow all the rules and regulations. It's our priority. We take a pride. We feel it's obligation. We live here. We're part of the society. We contribute to the society. But at the same time, we feel we have been a bit singled out. I guess I've been given my notes as well, or my warning. So we are continuing to do that regardless of the difficulties we're facing, because we all follow the rule of law. And we feel it's obligation for us to continue and follow the rule of law despite the difficulties we're facing. We are, as I said earlier, regulated by both federal and the state levels. They audit us semi-annually or annually, and believe me, when they audit us, the invoices that we get are not cheap. We spend a great deal of time and great deal of money to make sure that we are following the rule of law. And I would like to conclude by saying this. Just a few days ago, here in America, we celebrated 50th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Speech dream. We celebrated that together, but we're still waiting as a Somali descent, that dream to come true. And I'm hoping one day in my lifetime, it will come true. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Hersey. The next panelist is Michael Engman. He's a senior economist in financial and private sector development in the Africa region of the World Bank. He leads the implementation of a large investment loan projects across multiple sectors in Somalia and Madagascar. Prior to joining the World Bank, Michael worked at OECD, World Trade Organization, and the European Commission. He has a PhD in economics from Sciences Po in Paris. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I'm here in the capacity of the lead in the bank on the private sector side in Somalia, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our activities. But since the title of the panel was about rebuilding Somalia's economy, I would just like to start with an extremely rough snapshot of some of the major flows. If you look for data on Somalia, there's very little available. Remittances, you see estimates from $1 billion to $1.6 billion. The latest I saw was $1.3 billion. It's financing or funding a fairly large trade deficit that has been growing quite rapidly. Today, Somalia is exporting roughly $500 million worth of goods, mostly livestock, predominantly livestock. And it's importing food, energy, and consumer items. There's also quite a bit of ODA, mainly humanitarian assistance, flowing into Somalia. If you were to compare these flows to international benchmarks, you would see that remittances as a share of GDP is as high in Somalia as anywhere in the world. Tajikistan, Somalia are at the very top. It's a huge amount, maybe 50%, 45%, 40%, somewhere there, depending on the number you use. And it's also fairly large in terms of ODA. This is a watch list of some of the major impediments to trade and investment and to doing business in Somalia. You know about them, so I don't need to go into details, but insecurity is of course a huge issue, especially for anybody who's investing from abroad. The legal uncertainty, the huge gaps in the current legal framework in Somalia with regards to the private sector, with regards to investment. Some of these gaps will be plugged here in the coming 2-3 years, is one of the main priorities of the federal government. But also access to land, to finance, to skills are coming up high in many indicators, as well as we have an issue with some of the markets in Somalia. It's a conflict economy. Some firms are very powerful. They have strong affiliations with certain politicians and so on. So this will take some time to disentangle. Here's just some stylized facts. I'm using the stylized facts that we have for fragile and conflict-affected states and how the private sector looks in most countries that are similar to Somalia. And I'm adding some of what we find in Somali research on Somalia. It's largely informal. We did an enterprise survey in Somaliland last year, and we estimated that only 30,000 people work in the formal sector, out of a population of 3.5 or 4 million people. So it's, most of them are survivors, entrepreneurs, not by choice, but by needs. Then there are, of course, some large, fairly well-established businesses with secure market positions and access to finance from abroad mostly. The firms tend to be concentrated in trade and services with a high return on investment. They're less innovative and has a lower output if you compare them to firms in other countries of a similar structure. They start smaller and they're growing slower. And if we look at the business environment, as you could see from the previous slide with the main issues, you're not surprised that the high transaction costs, I'll get into that later, high security costs, very little dialogue, structured dialogue on a inclusive basis. Basic infrastructure is lacking or very costly. The numbers we see on energy supply and so on in major towns, it's some of the highest in the world. Now we can celebrate the fact that it's provided at all by the private sector, but the cost is very significant. I think to get a unit of electricity in Mogadishu is more than 10 times what you would pay in Washington, D.C., for example. Whoops, sorry. Okay. Most of the basic services are provided by the private sector, including in health and education, telecoms, power, water, urban solid waste collection, and so on and so forth. And that creates a framework for us to work with these sectors individually sometimes and sometimes overall. Now, this is just one graph from an enterprise survey that we did in Somaliland last year. There was a question in the survey. 500 firms responded to it. What is the single biggest obstacle to your firm in Somaliland? Half of them answered that access to finance is the biggest issue. Access to land, a quarter of them responded that was the issue. Of course, these are fairly crude crude indicators, and you need to dig down much further. What is it with regards to finance that is the issue of land? But we can see if you compare the experience in Somaliland with other countries of similar economic development, you see that access to finance, access to land, and transportation are significantly worse issues in Somaliland, whereas some others, supply of power, skills, and political instability are significantly less of a concern. Some of these issues, you can assume that they are quite similar in South Central and Puntland and the rest of the country. Whoa, okay. So we did a doing business indicator exercise in Hargeisa last year, and the sub-regional doing business. It's available on our website, doingbusiness.org. Just like to point out here that, if Hargeisa were to be compared to other capitals in the world, it would be ranked 174th out of 183 countries, or 184 countries. So, there's a lot of work to do there. So no shortage of serious challenges facing businesses, yet private investment has picked up in urban areas, mainly because diaspora has returned. Economic governance is improving, although from very low levels, but the indicators that we see and that we hear, that this is what is going on. And ODA is expected to increase drastically. I don't know how that will be managed but what we hear from the Brussels conference is huge. This is just an example. I will be very brief here. We have a project in Somalia. Currently, we're just focusing on Somaliland, but we're looking to expand to Puntland and South Central to cover all of Somalia. It's a business fund, a matching grant used to promote investment, job creation, and first round of applications, we received 1,350 applications. We awarded $4.6 million to 80 investors in Somaliland, and it was a huge interest. We received applications for proposals equaling $70 million. So this is one of the tools that we are using and that we will seek to use in the entire country. And these are some of the sectors that we had investment proposals that received funds. And you can see it's across the board. Services, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, utilities, private health and private education, solid waste management. It is, an enormous creativity and interest to invest. These are some of the activities in our current PSD activities. In addition to the fund that I just presented, we work on investment climate reforms, value chains programs, public-private partnerships linked to the port and solid waste collection. We have some advisory services and financial sector development, and we do a lot of analytical work and data collection. And now, if we are expanding to cover all of Somalia, now we have a government in Mogadishu that we can work with. We will base the design of that project on the New Deal, the Compact, and the Economic Recovery Plan. I think both of them were approved on Monday, I believe. That's the information I've received. We'll probably do quite similar activities, but there's some that we can't do for security reasons. We'll probably not do anything on value chain work because we need this, be ensured that the funds are being used for the right purposes. And if we cannot move around and travel, we'll not be able to do that in South Central, but Somaliland and Puntland should be possible. I would imagine that financial sector development will be at one of the main anchors in our support program, and we have met with the previous governor and the new governor and the Ministry of Finance, and working out activities that will build capacity in the central bank. And finally, just the huge challenges. It's very difficult to work in this environment. hugely challenging, linked to security, governance, and the issues of a conflict economy. We try to be as opportunistic as possible. It's the only way we can do things. We have to be very selective how we work. We need to be quite flexible as well, changing our plans, which is not what a huge bureaucracy like the World Bank is used to, but we do our best in this kind of environments. And there are also other programs that are being designed as we speak, linked to backbone services, IT, energy, livelihood programs, public financial management. So I think in the next 2-3 years there will be a lot of activities with our involvement in Somalia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. The final panelist today is Fatima Jibril, and Fatima is the founder of EDESO, previously known as the Horn Relief. It's an African-led non-profit organization that mobilizes local and international resources to protect the pastoral environment in Somalia. Fatima is also the co-founder of Sunfire Cooking in 2004, which introduced affordable solar cooking to the Somali people, and the Women's Network in Somalia, the Peace and Human Rights Network, and the Natural Resources Management Network. And she was awarded the Goldman International Prize in 2002 and the National Geographic Buffet Award for Leadership in African Conservation in 2007. And in the name of full disclosure, I should point out that I've been on the board of EDESO for the last 10 years or so have known Fatima very well and welcome her warmly to this event. Fatima, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and thank you very much for all of you, the organizers, and those of you who have given your precious time to get interested into Somalia's political and economic issues, and hopefully the way forward for both. I'm going to change what I wanted to talk about earlier, because I have learned a lot about what I had. Thank you very much for that, because I'm trying to fill the gap or whatever has not been said. I don't want to repeat what has been. It's not going to serve any purpose. I have been working with poor people or pastoralists, villagers, dropouts, affected dropouts from pastoral environment, and it is supposed to be the main economic way of life of Somalia is still now a pastoral way of life. I also work in coastal areas. In fact, I live in a village on the beach of the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. So I would like to see if I can help how we can connect to how all the good things we heard can trickle down to those people. And intentions have been good, from diaspora to international funding, support from the business people, support from middle economic people of Somalia. Support has been there always. Somalia has enjoyed a way of life of sharing. $100 sent through remittance is shared with neighbors, and it's shared with relatives, and outside the home. And in the home, there's always more than one person who is from extended family being raised in that house, sharing everything with that family. And I have never seen probably it's one of the best survival mechanisms they have. I have never seen, I lived many parts of the world, few, but in my Somali sense, it's quite a lot. I have lived in the Middle East, Somalia, and United States, and have traveled enough. I have never seen people who share as much, never. As one gets more income, the expense become wider. The sharing is, and a Somali usually does not leave a lot to be inherited. So that is a survival mechanism. Now, remittance is the biggest economy in Somalia, biggest economy. It's not aid and it's not livestock, because these three are the major ones. It's between 1.3 to 1.5 billion per year. Aid from the U.S. was the last time I read it is 245 million.
It's about 40% of the 1.3 billion.
Yeah. So, including EU also gives quite a lot.
It's almost $1 billion.
$1 billion together.
It's a $500 million.
Half a billion. $500 million together. 1 billion.
If we're talking, so if you're talking about all of the assistance across, so the two largest donors are the EU and the United States. It's about a $500 million a year.
$500 million. And it's less than, we can calculate 1.5 or 1.3, let's say, billion from remittance, yeah? And half of that being international aid. And by the way, international aid does not go to the person direct. It goes through a lot of professionals, NGOs, a lot UN agencies,
Local NGOs.
local NGOs. God knows how much percent really goes into the home state.
Right.
Now, we know livestock, the economic system of lifeline of livestock have been devastated by lack of infrastructure, competition with Australia and many other countries that have great infrastructure. Our political economy, because Saudi Arabia, when Ziad Barre was in power, I guess he had some magic to make them buy from us. We lost that. Fortunately or unfortunately, that was true. He made that economy move. Now, what we need to do is basically to understand that before we talk about aid, we want the United States and EU to make sure that the remittance does not only stop, but is not disturbed. That's a lifeline we cannot afford. This is much more important to us than building a government, because we survived without a government for 22 years, no matter what. It's more important than the whole aid that we get from the world. If you just keep that lifeline very important and priority one, we'll be grateful. Number two, if the livestock economy is paid great attention to, that means infrastructure, roads, availability of hay and grass and trees. That means it comes back to charcoal issue. We need energy to stop chopping limited trees for charcoal, so our livestock survives. We need packaging systems, that means ports, that we can have big ships that can take livestock in good health. We need the human infrastructure, supporting people with the knowledge. If that is done, and another economy is that Somalia has not been good at. It is the marine life economy that has been devastated. The marine life economy, Somalia is blessed with the longest coast in Africa, and all Somalia can get jobs from the marine life if we are supported to learn to conserve, to work at it. It's more expensive and more economically to sell fish and marine resources than a goat that you had a year or so. So let's pay attention to that. The world is abusing our marine resources, and it will also create love between the West and Somalis, because Somalis think the world is looking at it and letting it be destroyed because they don't care about Somalia. And if that can employ people, there will be no piracy, and that's how to eliminate or reduce in the name of Islam to kill people. That's how you reduce. You don't reduce by chasing one man or two with a lot of money. You reduce young people joining them, and that's how you do it. So how is missing from the World Bank? How is missing from the USAID? How is missing from EU? Please, you are not the only people who know Somalia. Consult with us. Let's plan together. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima, and I want to thank all four panelists for staying on time. I'm sure the prompts had nothing to do with it. They would have easily stayed within their time limit. I do a lot of public speaking and serving on a lot of panels, and it's astounding when you do it how quickly time goes by. And you think that you've only spoken for 10 minutes and you're 20 minutes into your program usually. So it's I think, a human failing on all of us that we tend to want to go a lot longer than we are scheduled to do. But we're in very good shape for questions and answers. And I would like to begin the question and answer session with the audience. I'll take 3 questions at a time and then ask the panelists which ones would like to respond. Some of the questions may be, if you wish to direct the question to a particular person, please do that. I may still ask one of the other panelists to comment also. Please be sure to give your name and your affiliation before you ask your question, and wait for the mic to come because we are being webcast. So let's start right here.
Good morning. Thank you for Wilson Center for this lovely discussion. My name is Abdul Halim Rijal. I work with the Digital Outreach Team, U.S. Department of State, as the only Somali channel that speaks in Somali with the audiences both in diaspora and in Somalia. And I would like to thank the panelists as well. I have a question for each, and first for Michael and for Linda. We are having a very difficult time to highlighting what is the programs that the USAID they do in Somalia. I understand there is a concern in terms of security in South Central, but in Somaliland as well as in Puntland and many parts of Somalia that's safe. Can you tell us what is the reason that we cannot see, because people in Somalia, if you ask today in the streets of Baydhabo, Kismayo and many parts of Somalia, what is the US doing in Somalia? They will tell you 2 things. One is that they are fighting piracy and terrorism only, and that's the truth. So how can we explain to them, that the taxpayers' money from American people to the Somali people, and we can highlight like the Turkish government, although they pay less many times than the US and the Europeans are combined. But if you ask the Somali people, they will tell you that. So thank you for that. The combined question for you and Michael is that the World Bank as well as the USAID, the question is coming back many times that we have the banking system is not working in Somalia. Is there any plan today that you will help the current government in Somalia, in federal government in Somalia, re-establishing the financial sector, because we know the hype of closing the remittance companies? Thank you. For Hersey, thank you for your presentation. I know that you are a banker and you have a great experience in banking system, and we know Dahabshil and many remittance companies. But a lot of people, they are saying the problem is not in the U.S., but the people that are accessing the money in Somalia, they might have access to this money, either terrorism or any other activities. How can you answer that? And what would you say if, or do you have any plan, or as collectively with the other organizations who at Remittance to restart, because you have the experience, so you can have your action to restart the remittance company, the banking system. A lot of people, they say in the remittance companies, they don't want the banking system to start because they're going to lose their businesses. That's what it says. For Fatima Jibril, thank you very much for what you do for the Somali community, and we would love to host you in our Connex program so that you can shed a light about what you do in Somalia. And my question is, you touched a very delicate question that a lot of people, because you work inside Somalia, do you have any presence in the South Central Somalia where the security is not safe at this time? Thank you very much.
Okay, we have about 4 questions in one there, so I'm going to let the panel respond to those questions before we move on to the next person. But let's start with Michael.
All right, thank you very much. I think there were 2 questions that somehow were directed to me. First one, what is, maybe USAID. The only thing I should say, I think USAID is the 2nd largest or 3rd largest supporter in Somaliland of the private sector. I could just say, you say people are not aware of it. People that work in Somaliland are well aware of USAID's activities. They are doing a lot of great work. Why is there no commercial banking sector in Somalia? That's a big question. I would like to invite, maybe Hersey has got some opinions on that. We are working to try to put in place the institutions to enable banking. We are right now designing a support program to the central bank in Mogadishu, and I expect this to be a fairly ambitious program. Should be in place early next year when we can start to work. We right now having a dialogue. There's a new governor, meeting with her tomorrow. She's just been in her new role for 6 days, I think. So, everything is new. We have to make sure that our plans are in line what she has got in mind. I can just tell you a little bit about the experience in Somaliland. There has been a commercial banking act that has been lingering for a couple of years. And somebody does not want this act to pass. And so the question is, how can the political process move to pass this bill in order to put in place the necessary institutions to issue licenses, to have proper bank supervision, because right now there is an informal banking sector. So there are private companies that take deposits. They are not regulated, they are not supervised, they're not checked up, and God knows what could happen in the future. One of these actors could fail, could be a bank run, and it's very, very risky, and we don't know all the dynamics politically, and the dynamics between the private and the public sector.
Yeah, let me go next to Hersey, and then we'll go to Linda after that. But I think since we're on the banking topic, Hersey, why don't you comment?
Let me first answer the question Abdul Hakim asked about the remittance money might get into wrong hand. First of all, in the history of money remittance, we all mentioned the remittance that goes to Somalia is about 1.3 billion. The average transaction is between $100 and $150. And as Faruma adequately said, that's what the family survived. And again, the history of money remittance I cannot recall any money that at least being reported get into the wrong hand. Pirates, other type of terrorists. So I can assure you the $100, $150, $200 get into the right hand to the people that it's supposed to go. Maybe if someone else can elaborate that, but to the best of my knowledge, that money goes to the right people. Because of the system that has been established back in Somalia, all over the Somalia, even the far, far, far remote villages, we'll make sure that money gets into the right hand and not to the pirates. We are fighting it with the pirates. We're not supporting them. So we'll make sure that money gets into the right hand. With regard with the banking system in Somalia, I think it's well documented. I think it's well known that there's no banking system functioning in Somalia for a long, long, long time. Yes, the banking system can come back, and I do believe can come back fairly quickly. Number one, I think the security needs to be improved. Number two, I think if experts from the world, especially World Bank, another international organizations, make it priority to establish the banking system, I think it can come back quickly. Remittance can play big role because my understanding is remittances are now, some of the remittances are now used as a banking system. So I really think being former banker is fairly the banking system can come back quickly if the international organizations, the current government, the regional government, Puntland, Somaliland, the new Jubaland, if we all put our mind together, I think the banking system can come back.
Thank you, Hirsi. Linda?
So I think, you know, there was a lot of applause about the fact that Somalis have been able to survive without a government system. And one of the things that I think we were thinking that was the big missing piece is the banking sector. And being able to have a system that the international community feels comfortable enough with. And again, this is not a policy with the US government. These are private banks assessing their own private risks and saying that we think that this is really risky business. I think we've been very clear as a government that we are behind this government in Somalia, that we think that we have a really great opportunity for supporting economic growth and recovery. And we acknowledge that we are, as the development community, humanitarian community, one small piece of what has kept this country surviving over the years and years and years. But I think that the next, moving Somalia to the next sector, to the next level, is going to necessitate a concerted effort by the international community in partnership with the government to actually rebuild this banking sector. And it was something that we talked about a little bit in Brussels as well, and I know that the IMF and World Bank have plans on sort of really partnering together with the government and a group of donors to really make sure that we're accelerating the pace on how we're addressing some of these issues. So we consider this a very important problem, and the government's own self-assessment identified it as one of their main priorities. Just separately, as far as why USAID and why the United States government, because it's not only USAID, is not seen widely as providing a lot of assistance in Somalia, and why we're not out in front. It's a question we get asked a lot. And I think we as AID sit often and hear people saying that we're not in this place or that place and that we're not doing a lot. And it's sometimes hard to hear, because I think we do have a lot of direct interactions with communities through local partners. And I think one of the conscious decisions that we made, and this was before the transition to the current government, was that we wanted to put the Somali people, who are actually the ones taking the risks, who are actually the ones creating the businesses, who are actually the ones coming up with their own solutions, front and center, and that we saw our assistance and aid as being an enabler And it wasn't necessary for the U.S. government to always be taking credit. Now, the Hill doesn't necessarily like that, and so you'll probably see us every once in a while sort of talking about what the United States government does, and we'll give ourselves credit, I think, in top-line instances. And we're really wrestling with, I think, right now, how much credit we want to give ourselves for a lot of the ingenuity and creativity that we see actually occurring on the ground right now. But yes, we're very involved, and I think that we're very proud of a lot of the work we do. And I think that the fact that we actually see results from it is sort of a back pat enough. And the fact that in some ways the enormous success of what we've seen is that we aren't actually being given credit for a lot of the efforts and a lot of the work that's being done. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think that the government has spoken loud and clear that we want to start transitioning, I think, away from Somalia being looked at as a place where it's just an aid recipient. And that the people who are actually making these changes occur need to be the ones who are the focal points. And so I think that we probably see ourselves continuing along that model, but I think that we will make an effort to sort of highlight, I think, some specific cases of where we're trying to do better in providing assistance more directly to reduce overhead costs to the extent that's possible, while still acknowledging, quite frankly, that as long as insecurity persists, especially throughout areas of southern and central Somalia, that we're probably going to still have to be working through a lot of other partners and not doing a lot of the assistance as directly as we'd like to. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Fatima?
First of all, the question that I have been directed to, ADESO is not a huge organization, and it's not historically, it did not exist too long of a time to expand. But we try very hard to try to stay as small as possible, so we don't stretch ourselves too far. And then we also hear the cry of our people, and we like to help wherever we can. So it is a delicate balance. However, we have worked. There are some places we have pulled out, like Ismail. We lost the young man who was leading our programs there, who has been killed. And we had to close the office. And we are still in that region. We are in Jubaland, and we are, and we don't go for major cities, but we are in the south, and we are in the central, like Galmudug and other places. We work in many regions, almost all regions of Puntland. We work in Somaliland. We are trying to open an office in Mogadishu because basically all the donors are going there. And sometimes we have to try to follow the money, but personally, you know, I am a board member, and David is one. To tell you the truth, it's not it is the least peaceful place that we are encouraged to follow the money, but we are not encouraged to work in Mogadishu because we don't work in cities, basically. Yeah, but we are in the south. That's one question directed to me. On other comments that I like to add to what my friends have been asked, the Hawala issue, the remittance, and banking. I think it would be best if the government, present government, is advised, and Somaliland, and Puntland, and Galmudug, and Jubaland, and all the lands, to be advised that they work with the present hawalas, money transfers, to be translated into banks. If we don't do that, and in the air we say, well, bank help the government to make banking system, they panic. They panic. And that's what would happen to any business person. In that dark room, they don't know whether they are being destroyed or supported. So we need something very transparent. We all participate, and the hawalas are supported and help to take steps to become banks. It depends on each hawala how big their bank is. And at the same time, one bank could be strong in Puntland, one bank could be strong in Somaliland, one bank would, it depends. But we need to help that in order to move forward. But don't tell the hawala, we're making banking policies. They will freak out and they will pay money and they will go against it and you won't know. That's my little sense of Somalia. I'm not saying it happens, but that's what I suspect.
Okay, let's open this up for a couple of more questions. Take one right down here in front first.
Thank you very much.
Your name and affiliation.
My name is Basto Ahmed. I'm with the Somali American Peace Council. I think it has been mentioned, and my question is, all the panels, specifically USAID. First, we thank USAID for helping our people. I'm someone who lived in the United States for the last 37 years. I'm ready to go back home. Unfortunately, I can't. However, my question is related to, I think you addressed some of the problems of the USAID. USAID has been in Somalia, I think, during even Siad Barre's regime. And we thank for the help and the assistance they gave. But the question is there anything tangible that you have done? That's what the Somali people is asking. And the second question is...
Let's confine it to just one question.
My last question is there a lesson that you can have from the Turkish style? And please don't answer the Muslims, because Shabab kills everybody indiscriminately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was a lady towards the back.
Should I go on that one first?
Good morning. Thank you so much to the panel. Very interesting. My name is Deirdre Lepin. I'm a consultant and a former scholar here at the Wilson Center. My question has to do with one economic sector that hasn't been discussed. It's the elephant in the room that's always ignored. We talk about livestock, fisheries, charcoal, financial sector. What about oil? In the late 1980s, when I was living in Somalia for 3.5 years, Conoco was very busy exploring for oil and very successful in finding some exploitable reserves. And 3 weeks ago, the Financial Times carried an article which was unusually concerning about an investment conference that was held in May in London, and that following that conference, an agreement was signed between the Somali government and a company that is owned by a conservative politician with zero capital, providing for about 6 concessions for exploration in Somalia. People are looking puzzled. This is an unknown story, but it's a great opportunity for the country, and yet it could be a lost opportunity if it falls into predatory hands. And that is very unusually what the Financial Times was pointing at in this article. I wondered if anyone had any comments. Perhaps Michael is aware, or any others.
The third question for this round, and I will ask the panelists to be as brief as they can in their responses, comes from Twitter. I don't know whether this is Twitter Smith or Twitter Abdi, but anyway, Twitter. Given the billion, and it's the question is actually very similar to the first question that was asked. It can be rolled in, I think, to the same panelists. Given the billions provided in aid for Somalia and billions more pledged, how do you evaluate the results? Let's start with Linda this time, and then go to Michael, and then see if others would like to add anything.
So I think, maybe I could even start with, can the U.S. government learn something from the way that Turkey has approached its engagement in Somalia? And I think that we have. I think that we've learned that presence matters. I think we've learned that taking some risks as much as we can matters. And I think that we have been talking, I think, a lot more about what we've been doing in the recent year, and I think the recent last 2 years, than we have altogether. And that is a reflection, I think, directly because we've seen the positive responses from people on the ground to hearing that Turkey's been a very forward-leaning. Our administrator made the trip to Somalia just a few months ago. I know that other senior U.S. government officials are committed to going and visiting as much as possible. Again, security sort of prevents us from actually establishing a permanent presence there, but I think that the desire is to move in that direction, and I think that the recognition of the government and hosting the government here this week is, our way of really showing that we think that the situation has changed. I think we had a question, and I'll be brief, about sort of whether or not there are any concrete things that we can show. I think the overwhelming amount of our investments during the war years, I think in Somalia, have been investments in people, and they're not as visible all the time. That said, we could go through, we have a lot of, quick impact projects where we've built clinics, we've built schools, we've helped train teachers, we've helped train students, we have a youth employment enterprise, we have a fishery vocational training enterprise. We've provided about $1 million just for 13 small and medium enterprises just this year to create about 1,500 new jobs. I mean, we have statistics like that, and I suppose we could go through and sort of document them. A lot of the investments, though, have been in people, and they haven't been as visible. And so that's always the question about whether or not, if we constructed some big building and put USAID's logo over there, I think people would probably recognize it. And there might be, there might be a benefit in that. So it's I'm not dismissing that at all. I think we've heard this loud and clear, and we're in the process of evaluating what that should mean.
Michael?
Yes, was a question regarding oil. We do look at it, but we're not working with the government on extractives at the moment. But I'm pretty sure we will, and we have experts in gas, oil, and mining that work closely with governments to work out the right incentive frameworks and legal frameworks and so on, how to handle this in the best way. But so far has never been on the agenda. You're right. I also think it's the elephant in the room, but I think it's probably going to be a huge issue if there is some stability and things normalize a little bit, because that's when these micro entrepreneurs, as I say, you mentioned this MP who brought no capital, but I don't know if he was a chairman or board member. But when they upgrade from the very small entrepreneurs to the medium-sized exploration firms, at some point there it's going to be a huge issue. I can't say much. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, yeah, we have, for the Mr. Twitter, we have
or Ms.
We have a very clear monitoring and evaluation framework. We try to focus on outcome indicators to the extent possible, and not output indicators. And output indicators is, for example, you say, we're going to train 500 people. You don't know what's the impact of that. Training can be 1 hour or 1 month, and it can be high quality and low quality. So sometimes we have some output indicators, but we try to have as many outcome indicators possible. One is the number of jobs that we create directly through this fund that I had a slide on, Somaliland Business Fund. And we hope that it will create roughly 2,500 direct jobs then there will be a lot of indirect jobs. So that's one outcome indicators. Another one is we're working on solid waste management. One of the outcome indicators is to increase the volume of garbage that is collected in Hargeisa by 50%. That's a very clear indicator. And we have other indicators, for example, how many operators are providing this kind of service. If there are 2, we hope there will be 5, because there will be more competition and so on.
Do either Hirsi or Fatima want to respond? If you do, I would ask you to be very brief. I want to have at least one more round of questions. So do you wish to add anything to this topic?
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
What I would like to add to is that USAID is one of the donors we work with, ADESO organization works with, and we were the first organization to advocate and implement cash for work and cash relief in Somalia. Basically, moving away from distribution of food to dollars, giving people dollars. And that has saved not only lives, but have improved livelihoods. And if you look at our literature outside, you will see, and a lot of that money is from USAID and EU. So it has changed the lives. It has helped to develop some programs that really became like roads, like fisheries, livestock, oasis farming, things like that. However, I will take this issue of results to a point where negatives also sometimes give you positive results. That not many internationals are able to go to Somalia, especially the remote places we work with, and we have been able to hire Somali professionals, and we have 2 Somali professionals leading 15 million euro environmental program now. That is not heard of as long as as far as I can remember. These programs like that being led by Somalis. It was led by usually foreigners. So the fact that the insecurity has happened opened doors for Somali professionals becoming as equal or equal to internationals. And that's one good result I would like to share with you on that negative side.
Okay, we'll do at least 2 more questions, and we have to end right at 11:30. So please be very brief with your questions, and I will ask the panelists to be equally brief. The lady right here, please.
Hi, my name is Kafi Ahmed. I'm a master's candidate at American University School of International Studies. I'm also from Minneapolis and Somalia, and born in Somalia. My question is related to, it's a bit of self-interest. During the 20-some-odd years of war, women were very powerful impact makers and innovators within Somalia. What, if any, role is being created or opportunities are being created for women to continue their powerful role, both historically in Somali culture and the role that they very thankfully took on during the conflict? Because it doesn't, from my view, it doesn't look like women are being put into the fold. And from what I know about Somali women, we will create our own path, but I would much rather we put in work as a Somali diaspora, as a community, and as a nation to create these opportunities. Thank you.
And there's a gentleman right over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Dominic Baltazar. I'm currently based with the United States Institute of Peace. I've been working on Somalia for a number of years now, and while we heard a lot about the different sectors that you're working in, remittances, private development, enterprise, livestock, and so on and so forth, I would like to tie it a little bit back to the title of the session, actually, and would like to ask you whether and how your work, your personal work in the different sectors has changed over the last year, and whether that can kind of like, you know, be an indicator on how the government has fared during the first years of its tenure. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're going to end there in terms of questions. I'm going to ask each panelist just to wrap up dealing with those two questions if they want to make one brief final statement, but we do need to be brief, and starting with Linda.
Okay, I'll be very brief because I'm very curious about what the other panelists have to say about these two questions. But one thing I will say is that I think that the role of women has been recognized as being extremely important, and that women are front and center, both when we were discussing in Brussels, if you look at the New Deal Compact for Somalia, more than any other compact that's being negotiated right now, women play a central role in that compact. And I think if you also look at the composition of the Somali government right now, we've got some pretty wonderful women leaders in Somalia. So I wouldn't say that they're completely out of the fold just yet. And then just to wrap up really quickly is I think that we are changing the way that we're doing business. I think that the fact that we have a central government to be responsive to is already a huge change. And while we're going to be focused, I think, as aid in the development community in general, still on local solutions as we move out, the fact that at the same time we're now talking about banking systems, we're talking about currency reform. These are fundamental changes that I think will help not just the economy but the governance structure across the board in Somalia going forward.
Thank you, Linda. Hersey?
I just want to say briefly the role women plays in Somalia. I think Somalia plays very, very, very big role, noticeable role, both in the diaspora world and back home in Somalia. And I think Fatima Jibril is a prime example of that and the role she plays in Somalia. So it's, as I said earlier in my earlier remarks, women and remittance is important in Somalia. And I do believe, based on what I read and what I heard, women plays bigger role and achieve a lot more than men in Somalia, and hopefully will continue. And young lady there who lives in Minneapolis, hopefully when you go back to Somalia, you will continue to play that role.
Thank you very much. Fatima?
First of all, yes, there are two highly professional, smart women in the government now, and that's a great talking. However, the 30% that we fought so hard for to attain, we lost it, and we did not get support from the international community to do diligence on that, because there was whatever the UN called, who was managing the whole thing, there was a group of women and men who were supposed to be gatekeepers, that the women get their share. That gate has been broken by the UN as the warlords became fierce, and I think they thought announcing a government on the 20th of what month was that, was more important, and giving that result to the world was more important than stopping it and saying, no, women's space has to be given. So I'll say this again and again, young lady, I'm sorry to say, your age has to take the heat and do something, because your age has to stop dancing for your clan men. You have to stop that. Unless women come to that, it won't change. We tried, we failed. Because nobody will give you space if you don't work for it, yeah? Women are not respected in the clan. So why do you have to be a servant for your clan? Yeah? So we have to change the clan elders deciding for Somalia. That's the basic thing. Unless that's broken, we will not have space. Thank you. And then one thing, if I may have, remittance have to hire women. Remittance are one of the big companies that have closed their ears on hiring women. Remittance, all the companies, and it's all led by people who have American citizens, most of them, yeah, these rich people. So you have to go in and research for that and expose them that they are not hiring women. The young women who are graduating from universities in Somalia are not getting jobs because they don't want to give them jobs. Thanks.
We've just heard from the Mzee philosopher. I've been listening to Fatima for the last 10 years on these themes. Michael, you have the last minute.
Okay, then I maybe say something about the question on assessing the first year of the federal government. I can't say much about, service delivery on the ground. I think it's very difficult. But in the engagement, the re-engagement with the international community, I think the government has been fairly successful. There's a new deal that has been approved. There's a new economic recovery plan that is in place, a good plan, I think. They have raised $2.4 billion, which, it's a huge war chest. Can create more problems, than, depending on how it's managed, but that's something very positive. And there's, the arrears clearance with the World Bank and IMF is, in process. And that, I don't know how long that will take. It depends on many factors, but let's say if it takes 18 months or 2 years, then Somalia will be reintegrated as a member. It can tap into, IDA funding and so on, and it will be much easier to, rebuild some of the infrastructure with, full control of the government and so on. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Michael. Please thank the entire panel.
And please thank David Shin for a wonderful moderation. Okay, we're now going to have a transition, not a coffee break. So we're asking our panel to step down and the new panel come up. We'll be replacing the name tags. As a transitional mechanism, I'll tell a story. I'm reminded by the very last part of the discussion of a conversation I had in 1994. I spent a lot of time being involved in South Africa and the South African transition, and we all know the role that women played in the liberation struggle in South Africa. And a very good friend of mine, a name you probably know, a woman named Mampila Rampelli, she and I were sitting down and talking, and I was, of course, very, very elevated and happy about the transition. We had the election. Nelson Mandela was now president. And I was saying, aren't you happy, Mampila? Isn't this wonderful, the progress we've made, and et cetera? And she turned to me and very straight face said, now the struggle begins. And I said, Mampila, what are you talking about? She said, now the struggle for women's rights. She knew what was going to happen in that country, as it happens in many, many African countries, where once power is transferred, where once empowerment begins, then it normally stays in male hands. And so there is a struggle yet to come, I'm sure, in Somalia.
La lucha continua.
La lucha continua. Okay, we're not having an actual break here because of our limitation on time. I'll ask the audience to please go ahead and take a seat. I know a few people are taking a refreshment or relief break. We can understand that. But I think we'll go ahead and get started now. So I'm going to ask the panel to take their seats. Going to
Terrence Lyons. Hi. Nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you. Look forward to hearing your comments.
And I'm going to turn over to our second moderator, also a friend of mine, Terry Lyons, who, as you know, probably know, is Associate Professor of Conflict Resolution at George Mason University, has been involved in this field, peace building, conflict resolution, for many, many years. I know he's worked at the International Peace Research Institute in Norway. We've also worked together a lot on problems around the Horn, the diaspora, and it's always been a pleasure in working with him on these issues. Very competent and very capable, and will lend a lot to our discussion today. So with no further ado, let me turn it over to Terry.
Thank you very much. Is Ambassador Tiedebaum here, or I'll just start without him? We've not yet gotten Ambassador Tiedebaum.
We'll
okay.
begin that.
Yeah. Paul.
Well, thank you all very much, and I appreciate the Woodrow Wilson Center and for the audience and the wonderful questions and discussions we had the first time. I'm going to try to model my moderation on Ambassador Shin's in that request and that the participants keep their comments, their presentations down to as close to 10 minutes as they can, and I think I'll be able to pass on notes and then again try to group questions together. We've not yet been joined, I'm squinting towards the back, by Ambassador Teitelbaum, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. And so I propose that we go in the order, starting with those who are here, and I'll start by introducing the speakers one at a time, and I'll start with Keith Jennings, a friend of mine going back at least to the 1997 Liberia, I believe, is when we may have first met. Keith Jennings is the Senior Associate and Regional Director at the National Democratic Institute. He's overseen a number of NDI's biggest programs in Africa, but also Indonesia, Philippines, and elsewhere. Before joining NDI, Keith was with the World Council of Churches, the NAACP, and Amnesty International and the UNDP. He received his PhD from Clark Atlanta University, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Keith, I'll give you 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. And I'm very happy to be here. Thanks to the leadership of the Wilson Center and our good friend Steve McDonald for inviting me and NDI to be here. Let me just say that this discussion is taking place at a very, very important time. And as we heard from the last panel, there are a lot of intricacies that need to be considered. What I'd like to do is to help us step back for a moment and to look at the questions of where are we and where are we going. This is a normal question that people would ask. I think the title that's been chosen, Assessing the First Year of the Federal Government, is an important one. We'll try to make a contribution there. But let me just remind you and try to connect the last panel. Issues of the banking system, insecurity, the legal framework, access to information, skills, and even some of the positive things that were mentioned, improving economic governance system. All of those are related to the question of governance. Unfortunately, when peace and security are often discussed, sometimes the issue of governance is forgotten. And I believe that it's very important that if we are to have a meaningful discussion, that we could start with some conventional wisdom. And that would be the following. If there's no peace and security, there can be no meaningful development, or in the Somali case, successful reestablishment of the state, of hopefully a democratic state. Africa has faced and continues to face ever-increasing range of security challenges. Some of the more traditional ones are civil and border conflicts, crises of government, and military coups. But today they've been joined by issues such as globalization, security sector reform, terrorism, private security actors, peacekeeping, peace building. All of these have risen in their prominence. And within the last few years, there have been global strategic interests that are being played out in the Horn of Africa around issues that are important. Drought and famine, humanitarian emergencies that are generated by civil conflicts, other regional security concerns, the social fragmentation that we see, and including diaspora politics. The young lady there is from Minneapolis, and I think there are a number of agencies with small letters that pay close attention to Atlanta, where I'm from, and Minneapolis and other places, because of the concern for international threats of terrorism. But also the oil issue of investments, especially in extractives. And this is the context. Now, the issue for Somalia, however, is that perhaps no other place on the African continent could you find a convergence of all of these issues. And that is something that we have to understand, because the political context is so important. How we got to where we are, many of you know, but it may not be bad to recount a few key points. The overthrow of Saad Bear in '91 didn't just take place in an abstract way. The U.S. at that time during the Cold War and the Soviet Union were involved in this flip-flop support for Marxists and other socialist regimes that were more akin to their way of seeing the world. The victorious clans were unable, however, to agree to replacement. And this is well known, but again, we should think back on that. But the decades of fighting between the rival warlords and the militias meant that the country was ill-equipped to deal with some of the pressing issues that was talked about this morning. And it further gave opportunity, following the incursion of the Ethiopians to remove the judges, it gave rise to the possibility of insurgents who later would affiliate with the global terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda. But the efforts of the African Union, who supported peacekeepers through Amazon during the 2011-2012 period, was significant. And it helped to give the possible framework for this new government that came in to end this 8-year transitional period. So during this sketch of history that I'm going back over, Somalia did not have a formal set of governing institutions or a parliament for that matter. And I know that my sister here, who was making some very important points on the previous panel, alluded to a fact that Linda responded to, that we've been able to survive in the absence of government. I won't comment on that from a negative side, but just imagine what could be achieved if there were a responsible governing institution. The 1.3 or 1.6 billion that is going back in remittance would not be facing the question of whether Barclays Bank is going to stop that and what that potential impact might be. It could be complementary to a lot of the development efforts that I'm sure will be taking place. And some of the governing challenges that I would see as in the first year, I think it's very important to say that there's obviously been a challenging time. The accusations of corruption, the issues, again, that were already outlined by Linda, should give us pause. At the same time, the international community's support and recognition of this government cannot be ignored, including the U.S. recognition of the government. The role that a number of countries, not only Turkey, but other countries located in the Middle East have been playing, and the role, while the certain things have been inferred about the British, but the positive role that the British have tried to play. And some of this, I think, we'll continue to see what the negative role might be, as the Financial Times has pointed out. But defeating insurgents is only one part of the story. Rebuilding democratic institutions, reviving and improving service delivery to citizens, and delivering on the promise of democracy in general are among the major challenges the new government continues to face. To meet those challenges will require the federal House of the People to pass legislation that addresses the needs of Somali citizens, the executive branch to effectively implement that legislation, and both government bodies to provide oversight in a transparent and accountable manner. Additionally, the federal constitution must be finalized and ratified by Somali citizens. Reconciliation has to take place, and peace and state building objectives, as outlined in the President's 6 Pillars policy, must be met. And the New Deal Compact is expected to help President Hassan deliver on his strategy for peace and democratic development. But from if you look at this question that is posed here, how should one evaluate the governance and security situation in Somalia after the first year of the federal government being in place? I think it's context again. The transition period ended on August 20th, and I could say that NDI was one of those organizations that was pushing for the 30%. But again, the ownership of the process is a Somali process, and we can't impose our views there, but I think that would have been a good thing. Here are 7 issues that we believe are very important, not only for the Somali peoples, but for those who want to provide support and show international interest in and support for this process. First, the government has to continue to legitimize itself. And it can do that by being responsive to the people's needs. Because at the end of the day, it is whether or not the people see the government, the federal government, as being legitimate. A critical component of this is helping to build the capacity of government to deliver on its vision and mandates and to develop its own national agenda. National reconciliation. National reconciliation and healing at the local level must accompany the reestablishment of effective institutions at the district, regional, state, and federal levels that is coupled with peaceful and competitive politics. Finalizing the new Constitution. As I said earlier, this is one of the main challenges, but the process of finalizing it has to be an inclusive one. And it has to be one that will be done in a way that makes the Constitution sustainable. Unifying Somalia. This is another issue, and because Puntland and Somaliland currently operate in a semi-autonomous or somewhat independent way, devising a system of governance that would have these entities working together, including the Juba interim administration or Jubaland, would be so important, whether that is a federal system akin to Canada or a federal system like the United States, or maybe a new type of federal system. Some political system will have to be put in place. Fostering a peaceful and safe country. This can only be achieved by defeating those forces that generate insecurity in Somalia and reestablishing the state's monopoly on the use of force. And I wanted to be very clear there. But it will also take interstate cooperation, especially from key states in the region, such as Ethiopia and Kenya. Addressing the marginalization of young people and women. Yes, we applaud the role that women have played historically and especially over the last 20 years, but if that is not reflected in the governing system, then why should women continue to support a government that was, that some may say wasn't really elected, but was selected? And finally, engaging in inclusive economic development strategies. That's a really important one because in the past, how people have seen the distribution of resources has been a generator of insecurity. At the end of the day, the future possibilities for this government to be successful with all of the challenges that was talked about on the first panel and some that I've mentioned are vastly different than all of the prospects that previous transitional governments face. Moreover, in the recent years, the Somali people and their leadership have demonstrated a willingness to listen, to understand and accept each other's views and opinions and embrace a peaceful resolution to existing clan, social, and political differences. In my view, the best way to secure a bright future for the Somali people and the region, and therefore, by extension, the international community, is for those of us who intend to support this process to stand ready to support the priorities identified by the Somali people, and while we continue to respect the sovereignty that has come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Keith. We are now joined by Ambassador Donald Teitelbaum, rather, and I'd like to turn to him. I'll do a brief introduction and then ask you to speak for approximately 10 minutes. Ambassador Teitelbaum is Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for East African affairs. His most immediate post prior to this, I believe, was as Ambassador to Ghana. Ambassador Teitelbaum has been a career member of the Foreign Service and notably has a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia, where I also graduated. And so now the competitor, perhaps, of my current position at George Mason University. But anyway, I look forward to hearing your perspectives on Somalia. Thank you.
Am I on? I'd like to thank Steve McDonald and the Wilson Center Africa Program for convening this important event to assess the first year of the Somali federal government. Returning to the Africa Bureau as a Deputy Assistant Secretary and taking up the Somalia portfolio nearly 20 years after my assignment in Mogadishu, I'm struck by how much has changed and by how much hasn't. When I was a reporting officer in Mogadishu in 1992, the era of the warlord was at its height. Somalia's clan-based militias competed for dominance with a vision of recreating a power structure along the lines of Siad Barre's previous government, in the belief that control of Mogadishu was synonymous with control of Somalia. Somalia suffered high levels of violence, low levels of development, and an acute humanitarian crisis. Today, I note with sadness that more than 20 years later, much of Somalia still suffers high levels of violence, some of the lowest development indicators in the world, and a continuing humanitarian crisis. Nonetheless, the Somalia of today is not the Somalia of 1992. Clan politics and clan-based militias are still major factors, but warlords are no longer the sole competitors for political and economic power. Space has opened up for elements of a vibrant civil society to grow. The dynamic business community has shown a strong capacity to develop, invest, and influence Somalia's direction. When the Somali parliament elected President Hassan Sheikh last September 10, the U.S. and the international community recognized that changes in Somalia had created a real opportunity to emerge from 2 decades of conflict and destabilization. Let me be clear that I'm not a Pollyanna. The United States government sees the situation in Somalia very clearly. Somalia is a country with very real security, humanitarian, and political challenges. It's also a country that is evolving. With the transition to a legitimate elected government, Somalia has the best opportunity in decades to overcome its challenges. Somalis and their African partners have been quick to recognize this opportunity. The African Union, IGAD, and neighboring countries have taken the lead in assisting the Somali government, and the international community has been quick to offer support. This model, an African-designed, African-led effort, is of fundamental importance. Somalis have chosen their legitimate government. The Somali federal government and Somali security forces, assisted by AMISOM troops from Uganda, Burundi, Djibouti, Sierra Leone, and Kenya, as well as strategic partner Ethiopia, have driven al-Shabaab forces out of their former urban strongholds in places like Mogadishu and Kismayo. The model of African leadership and action is both effective and sustainable, and the U.S. government is committed to supporting it. We all recognize the serious challenges that lie ahead as Somalia seeks to promote both security and good governance, and the U.S. government is committed to support Somalia and its African partners for the long haul, fully understanding that there will be difficulties and even possible setbacks along the way. The euphoria that greeted governmental transition and the withdrawal of al-Shabaab from its urban centers has subsided. A series of brutal attacks on high-profile targets, like the June 19 attack on the UNSAM compound and the July 27 attack on the Turkish diplomatic compound, is a time of difficulties and setbacks. But even while we grieve for the Somali and international victims of these attacks, I think it's important to consider the broader context of security in Somalia. While these kinds of bloody attacks are painful, I believe they are far less an existential threat to the emergence of central government than was al-Shabaab's former entrenched presence in major urban areas, where it was able to recruit, generate finances, and grow stronger. As we work with President Hassan Sheikh's administration, our U.S. policy objectives are threefold: to eliminate the threats of terrorism and piracy, to help the country achieve political and economic stability, and to respond to the humanitarian needs of the Somali people. Right now, our efforts in Somalia include a very strong focus on security assistance, because lack of security and stability limit progress toward all our shared goals. While I can only speak on behalf of the United States, I do feel, however, that I should recognize the role of the international community. The European Union and its member states, the Turks, Japan, the Qataris, and others have had in supporting Somalia's stability. The African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, and their strategic partners Ethiopia have been the power center to support Somali government efforts to enable a more secure environment in Mogadishu and now in Kismayo. The United States, and having just come from the Brussels New Deal Conference on Somalia, I believe I can say the international community clearly remains strongly committed to continuing this assistance as AMISOM and the Somali security forces work toward building on the security gains they've made over the past few years. The U.S. has been one of the most significant donors to the international effort to reestablish security in Somalia. From fiscal year 2007 through fiscal year 2013, including our UN assessments, we provided more than $775 million to provide support to AMISOM. Between fiscal year 2012 and fiscal year 2013, we provided more than $140 million to support the development of Somalia's own security forces. Our support for AMISOM is multifaceted. We provided AMISOM troop contributors with a broad range of equipment, including APCs, trucks, communications gear, personal protective equipment, engineering equipment, water purification equipment, and generators. We funded the provision of contract advisors to AMISOM to improve its ability to counter al-Shabaab's rapidly evolving tactics and overcome the challenges posed by the rapidly expanding AMISOM area of operations. We provide support flights for some of the AMISOM contingents between Mogadishu and their capitals. The U.S. also supports building the capacity of the Somali National Army. Our support has included the provision of equipment, infrastructure improvements, food, fuel, stipends, and logistical support for regional training initiatives. We funded contract advisors to work with AMISOM as it seeks to implement the security sector reform element of its mandate. We recently deployed an advisor to work with the Somali Ministry of Defense as it seeks to establish effective civilian control over Somali armed forces. And most recently at the New Deal conference I just referenced, we announced an additional $21 million to support the SNA. As I previously noted, though, security assistance alone will not address the challenges facing Somalia. I think you can make a case that al-Shabaab is not the most important of the challenges in Somalia, only the most immediate. I think the greatest challenge facing the Somali federal government, as I think my counterpart was alluding to just a few moments ago, is to provide the good governance and services that justify their authority and the people's trust. Let's remember how hypersensitive we Americans were about recreating a strong and potentially abusive government after our own revolution. And I think many Somalis are similarly hypersensitive about the potential for a return of the repression and kleptocracy of their own past. Somalia's institutional capacity across all sectors, however, to develop a central government that provides services to its people is nascent. On the governance front, President Hassan Sheikh confronts the challenge of engaging regional authorities in Somalia and the humanitarian crisis of internally displaced people and refugees in neighboring Ethiopia and Kenya. To promote good governance and stabilization, USAID is focusing on quick impact programs inside of Somalia. The programs range from installing road lights, paving roads, removing garbage, and reconstructing cities. The program uses community bidding and contracting processes to improve transparency, accountability, and oversight at the local level. Local communities own their own progress towards stabilization rather than viewing change as the unwanted work of outsiders. The U.S. also supports parliamentary efforts to build oversight capacity to strengthen public financial management in Mogadishu, something that I can't emphasize the importance of enough. We also are working with local Somali police units to help build a cohesive law enforcement body. Somalia has seen too much conflict. The majority of people living in Somalia today have never known peace or good governance. Somalis now demand a new solution, and President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and his government, with the support of Somalis and other Africans, offer an African-led solution. This is likely to be a long and difficult journey. There will continue to be challenges and setbacks, but even so, this African effort is Somalia's best hope of success, and the United States will be there to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me turn to our third speaker, Professor Paul Williams, who currently serves as an Associate Professor of International Affairs and the Director of the Security Policy Program at George Washington University. He is also a Senior Advisor at the International Peace Institute and a visiting professor at Addis Ababa University's Institute for Peace and Security Studies. He received his PhD from the University of Wales, and I look forward to your comments. Paul.
Thank you very much, Terry, and thanks to Steve McDonald and the Africa Programme for the invitation. I was asked to speak about some of the principal challenges that the African Union mission to Somalia has been facing over the last year, and think about our question in light of what's been happening to the African Union mission. I think a couple of initial points about context. To my mind, first of all, I think some of the initial optimism that surrounded the selection and creation of the new federal government in Somalia, I think some of that is starting to be replaced by a sort of renewed awareness, if you like, of some of the structural forces for greater continuity in Somalia rather than change. And secondly, the context in which AMISOM finds itself is one in which the mission, together with the United Nations and the new federal government, is going to have to devise and develop a new concept of operations, because the old concept of operations made in late 2011, early 2012 is basically out of date, and I'll say more about that later. So I want to use the rest of my time to basically outline what I think are 4 of the principal challenges that AMISOM has been facing in the last year and continues to face moving forward. And I'll just list them briefly here and then go through in a bit more detail. I think the first one is to do with the at times very difficult and turbulent relationship between AMISOM and the new federal government. I think the second set of challenges revolves around building or trying to build an effective set of Somali national security forces. I think the third set of principal challenges revolves around AMISOM's relationship with its principal opponent, that's Al-Shabaab. And I think the fourth set of challenges revolves around the mission's decision to implement a new protection of civilians strategy as of May this year. So I want to say a bit more in detail about each of those 4 sets of challenges. The first one is to do with AMISOM's relationship with the new federal government. And obviously, AMISOM has a principal mandate to support the new federal government. But AMISOM, to be blunt, has been caught up in a conflict between the federal government and the various different types of regional authorities across Somalia, the different lands that we heard referred to earlier. Now, in essence, I agree with the other speakers, as we've heard before, that this is essentially a conflict about the nature and type of the Somali state. How much degree of centralization versus how much degree of federalism are we going to give to the different units of Somalia? Now, as I would see it, when the new federal government assumed office late last year, it faced a real problem. On the one hand, it had no real capacity to exert control in these different lands and across the different regions of Somalia. And it was faced with a variety of de facto authorities, regional, provincial, and the like, in different parts of the country. And so it faced a problem. What should it do in response? On the one hand, should it do relatively little, focus on Mogadishu and its environment there, and be seen as perhaps being weak in the face of these de facto regional authorities? Or should it take a more forceful response and try and exert its view and its authority outside of Mogadishu and see what happened? And obviously this has led to, initially, the government starting with a process of dialogue, reaching out to the authorities in Somaliland, Puntland, Jubaland, Galmudug, Bayan Bakul, and others. And as we've seen over time, that approach became more forceful, particularly as the federal government decided to focus on the south as the key sort of initial problem, particularly to do with Kismayo and Jubaland issues more generally. But of course, having chosen to go that more forceful route, there's a distinct prospect the government might lose in the conflict that was to come. Now, as we know, that's been the story, and I think the recent deal that we've seen with the interim Jubaland administration is a sort of 2 cheers, I think, for the new federal government's strategy on that front. Now, the problem here, or the challenge I see for AMISOM, was that it was very much caught up in the middle of that conflict, and AMISOM was not united. It was divided amongst itself, and in particular, the Kenyan contingent in Sector 2 actively obstructed initially the federal government's efforts and chose to basically ally themselves with Ahmed Madobe's forces. And at times, during the last year, the federal government had made it very clear that they would rather not have Kenyan forces being the primary AMISOM contingent in charge of the Jubaland area. And I think it remains fairly unclear how Kenya is going to respond to these requests. And I think for the mission, and AMISOM in particular, this has raised big questions about the limits of AMISOM's centralized command and control structure and its ability to act as a coherent, unified force as opposed to a series of several disconnected parts around the different national agendas of its TCCs. And as I said, now that we've seen the recent deal for the interim administration, time will tell how AMISOM and the Kenyan contingent in particular is going to deal with that legacy of problems. The second set of challenges I think AMISOM has faced is building an effective set of Somali security forces. And in sum here, there's no viable exit strategy for AMISOM unless there is an effective set of Somali security forces. And when I speak about security forces in this context, I'm talking primarily about the Somali National Army, the police forces, and the intelligence forces. Now, I think here the prospect of building such effective forces anytime soon, unfortunately, remains extremely limited for two main reasons. Firstly, technical reasons. There's a long list of technical challenges that the security forces face, whether this is about training, equipment, salaries, all that type of sort of stuff. But the principal problems, I think, of reform are essentially political. And here there's a couple of key issues that have been bedeviling the process. Number one is a question of loyalties. We've seen time and again loyalties to clan or loyalties to personal militias tend to trump loyalties to something called a national government. And the second big problem we've seen, particularly in the Somali National Army, is the senior officer corps continues to be riddled with corruption and nepotism and has lacked the effectiveness, I think, to lead this reform effort from the top down. So in sum, this means AMISOM's been faced with a very difficult set of circumstances in that it's supposed to be working with a new national security force, but it's been very hard to build a genuinely national security force when there's big disagreements about what exactly constitutes the nation and how loyalties to a national identity conflict sometimes with loyalties to clan, militia, or other types of agendas. And then the third set of challenges I think AMISOM has been facing is basically to do with its principal opponent, that is Al-Shabaab. And here, of course, AMISOM's primary mission has been a military one. Most of its 18,000 personnel are soldiers, and its primary mission to protect first the TFG and now help the new federal government has been to degrade the capacities of Al-Shabaab. However, it was, I think, quite instructive that in June of this year, the African Union and its Peace and Security Council concluded that without additional capabilities, AMISOM's mission basically had reached what it called its operational limit. And the AU concluded that it remains without all required force enablers, and AMISOM would therefore not be engaging in any major advances to recover more territory from Al-Shabaab. And what that meant is, outside of the key base areas of Kismayo, Baidoa, Beledweyne, Mogadishu, and others, AMISOM adopted a policy really and posture of consolidation rather than expansion. On the negative side, this basically ceded territorial control to outside of those areas to Shabaab. I think it's also instructive, as we've heard, to return back to the 1990s. I mentioned AMISOM has about 18,000 personnel. The UNISOM mission and the Unified Task Force back in the early 1990s, they assessed that to cover the south central Somali area, you needed in the high 30,000s numbers of troops. AMISOM has about 18,000. The other 18,000 were supposedly to come in the form of the Somali security forces, but as I mentioned earlier, those have not yet materialized. So how has Shabaab responded to this? I think in three ways. They responded to AMISOM's consolidation. Number one, they focused on basically ambush tactics along AMISOM's supply routes between Mogadishu, Baidoa, Beledweyne, and Kismayo. Secondly, they stepped up the number of attacks that we've seen in Mogadishu, substantial increases from grenade attacks and the bigger, more spectacular attacks from sort of May to June and July this year. And thirdly, it's begun the process of reorganizing some of its forces further north in the country. As for conclusions, in July this year, the UN Monitoring Group concluded, and I'll quote because I think it's important, the military strength of Al-Shabaab with an approximately 5,000 strong force remains arguably intact in terms of its operational readiness, its chain of command, its discipline, and its communication capabilities. By avoiding military confrontation, it has preserved the core of its fighting forces and resources. The monitoring group also concluded that on the issue of charcoal and the illicit trade in charcoal, Shabaab had actually continued to do as well as it was doing while it controlled Kismayo as after it had been kicked out. And in September, earlier this month, the UN Secretary General concluded that although the recent infighting, the sort of purge of Shabaab's leadership that we saw in June this year, although Shabaab suffered or went through that process and has been to some extent divided and under pressure, it still remains capable of carrying out intensified attacks against both civilians and international targets. Okay, final challenge then. is to do with the protection of civilians. Here I think it's important to stress that if we ask local Somalis how they judge and evaluate AMISOM, it's not solely on the basis of how many al-Shabaab fighters AMISOM has killed or how many al-Shabaab fighters AMISOM has encouraged to defect or capture, but rather it's to do with judging the mission on how well the operation helps enhance public security and the physical safety of ordinary Somalis in the areas where it's working. And that's going to be the essential benchmark through which we look at AMISOM through a local prism. Now, after a long period of debate within the mission and outside, finally in May of 2013, AMISOM adopted an explicit strategy of civilian protection. And since May 2013, it's been involved in developing a mission-wide strategy to figure out what exactly that entails and what it should look like. What are the key threats facing civilians in the areas of its operations, and what are the things that AMISOM might usefully do to mitigate those threats? The problem is, of course, is that there are no new resources that have come with this new mission-wide strategy, and here is the rub. The big ticket item, if you like, that's been debated for years is military attack and utility helicopters. AMISOM years ago was mandated to have 12 of these. It still has 0 military helicopters. UNSOA, the UN Support Office for AMISOM, has managed to contract 3 utility helicopters that are used. These are used for things like medical evacuation runs, transporting basically VIP personnel around the place and lifting some cargo. But AMISOM doesn't have the aerial capabilities that it needs to take on its opponents. It definitely is going to mean that AMISOM, if it's going to focus more on civilian protection, needs a greater policing component and to beef up its civilian component in terms of political affairs and civil affairs officers. But at the moment, they've been basically lacking. And also, it's going to see established now, finally, the creation of a funny acronym, the CCTARC, which stands for the Civilian Casualty Tracking, Analysis and Response Cell. But basically, this is going to be AMISOM's eyes and ears, if you like, to assess the challenges and the threats facing civilians in Somalia, being funded, as I understand it, partly by the UK government. But AMISOM is going to need to do a much better job of monitoring trends in terms of threats to civilians and casualties and figuring out how it can play a role. Now, the challenges here for the mission, I think, are twofold, and this is where I'll finish. One is that the federal government over the last year has repeatedly said and emphasized that it sees AMISOM primarily as a military tool that is useful in bludgeoning and degrading al-Shabaab. It is much less convinced that it wants to see AMISOM police and civil and political affairs officers engaging in human rights monitoring, governance processes and stabilization, which it would prefer to do with its own personnel. Secondly, I think this is going to massively raise local expectations about what they should expect from AMISOM, and they're going to be very difficult to meet, quite frankly. So I think it sets up AMISOM for more failure in that sense. And finally, back to what I mentioned right at the beginning, the UN, AMISOM, and the federal government are aware that we need to revise and revisit the concept of operations for the mission, which is based on a threat assessment that took place in late 2011 and early 2012. So the UN and the UNSOM new mission and AMISOM are going to have to work very closely together to devise that new concept of operations. And there is currently an assessment team and benchmarking process undertaking that, and it's not yet clear how that will play out. But those, I think, are the 4 main challenges that I would see AMISOM facing over the last year.
Thank you very much, Paul. Our 4th speaker is Omar Dair, who was the first secretary of the Embassy of the United Kingdom in the United States, where he covers Africa, UN, and conflict issues. He has been a member of the UN Diplomatic Service since 2002. Prior to coming to Washington, he was the head of the British Embassy office in Juba, and in that position led the UK government's team in South Sudan. He has degrees from both the London School of Economics and from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies, and look forward to hearing your thoughts, Omar.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Wilson Center for hosting. I'll try and be relatively brief, partly because I'm the last speaker on the last panel, but also because I know there's been a couple of Somalia events already this week, and we'll also be hearing from President Hassan Sheikh himself tomorrow, so you may feel slightly Somalia'd out. But I think the fact that there are all these events shows quite how high a priority Somalia is now. I don't need to explain quite how high a priority it is for the UK in particular, We've hosted 2 large Somalia conferences in the last couple of years. In Brussels earlier this week, we announced a further £50 million worth of support. This is something that we think is really important. But when I look at this question, it made me think that it's more about Somalia now. We've moved into a stage where this is really about Somalis and Somalia and not so much about the international community. And if I was judging my government's performance at an election, as I do every 4 years, the first question that I asked myself is, have they done what they told me they would do? And so I think if I was a Somali to judge the federal government of Somalia, I'd ask myself that question. And the president has actually made that relatively easy for us. He set out his 6-pillar strategy. I won't go through it in detail, but I mean, those covered stability, economic recovery, peace building, service delivery, international relations, and unity within Somalia. And I think if we were to be back here at the Wilson Center next year and the year after and on the 4th year, we would be looking at those topics and saying, how well have they delivered on those promises? I think out of those, the most important one when you're a fragile state like Somalia has been, when you've been through the type of conflict that Somalia has been through, is stability. And how well is the federal government of Somalia building that stability? What I'd see by stability is a political system which would be representative and legitimate, which would be capable of managing and resolving conflict, but also one that developed a society where human rights and the rule of law were respected, where economic opportunities were open to all, and where basic services and basic needs were met. And I think we have to say, if that's a 4-year plan, it's already very ambitious for the government in Somalia. But I think what they have achieved already has been pretty remarkable progress. If we look at the stability, the government in Somalia has taken a lead on developing its own programs now, rather than in the past where there may have been a sense of the international community telling Somalis what they needed and what they wanted. We've seen this turned around. In London, it was the federal government of Somalia who came forward with their own plans on how to deal with security, how to improve the justice sector, how to deal with corruption through improved public financial management. And again, in Brussels, we saw a New Deal compact which had been negotiated between with the Somalis and with the EU, but developing a real sense of mutual accountability for the first time. And this is something where I think we've seen a step change in governance in Somalia. And I think one of the lines that came out of the Brussels communique that really struck me was where it said that further progress, quote, rests on building a national consensus among all Somalis of the kind of Somalia in which they want to live. And I think this is also clear that the government has accepted that it needs to listen to and work with society in Somalia, and rather than just with politicians. And I think we saw some of that in the Vision 2016 conference that was held in Somalia recently, where the government and the president set out some very clear steps to move towards greater consultation on the constitutional process and in the build-up towards elections. On security too, I won't go into that much detail because we've heard a lot about what Amazon have done, but I think we have to say that the government has made a lot of progress. Al-Shabaab are weakened, security in Mogadishu is better. We do need to see that expanded beyond Mogadishu, but I think that's been a really important change. On the economic recovery point, you heard a lot this morning about the New Deal compact and what that can achieve. But I think in setting out these high expectations for changes to public financial management and tackling corruption, the government has also creating an atmosphere where the diaspora can come back, where investors can invest, and where we're actually seeing a change in the optimism about doing business in Somalia, which I think will make a big difference to people there. In terms of sort of internal dynamics in Somalia, I think the government has also made some real progress. it was perhaps slower to get going than we might have liked, but I think seeing on Monday that both the leaders of Puntland and Jubaland were in Brussels with the Somali government is a signal of the progress that they are making. And I think that we need to help them and to support them develop that further. And that also brings us on to the international relationships with Somalia's neighbors. I think we all know what an important role those countries have played in security in Somalia. But also, I think in terms of going forward, its economic relationships will be important, and broader stability in Somalia won't happen without good relations with its neighbors. And I think this government has been working pretty hard to do that. So I would just say that if I was to answer this question, I'd say that they're doing pretty well so far. It's a tough job, but it's pretty good. I think in question and answer we can go into some more detail on that. But one of the things that just really strikes me in summing this all up is quite how many important politicians around the world have associated themselves with Somalia over the last year, either through big international conferences or statements or money and so on. And I've worked with a lot of different politicians, as I'm sure many people have, and I've never met a politician who wants to associate him or herself with failure. And I think that the fact that so many of them are willing to put their names in the same sentence of Somalia is a sign that people really believe that something is changing, and that we do have prospects for a different kind of Somalia, and a Somalia that's better for its people. So I think we'll all need to work closely together in keeping that momentum going, because the last thing that we would want was to become complacent about it. But overall, my assessment is pretty good.
Thank you very much, and thank you all four speakers for, as with the prior panel, being so disciplined in the time, which leaves us something like 35 minutes for discussion. I am going to follow the pattern that Ambassador Shin had of collecting 3 questions and asking you each to identify with your name and affiliation. But before I do that, if I may put a guest in the front row on the spot, we have here the new Special Envoy to Somalia, James McNulty. And I wanted to give you an opportunity first to make any comments or any questions that you would like to raise, as you wish. Or I'll let you off the hook if you would prefer.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. I have only been in my position for about 6 weeks now, so I'm still new and learning, and I found all the comments to be very interesting, especially from the boss. No, Somalia is such a complex country to deal with, so I think and I certainly appreciate all the interest that everybody has here in coming, and of course President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed will be having a series of meetings tomorrow with senior officials in our government as well, and there is indeed very keen interest. This is a very critical time for Somalia, and we do hope that they move forward with development and security in their country. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I will follow the procedure as before of collecting 3 questions. I'll start right in the front row here, and if I can ask each of the people with questions to please try to keep them brief, and also to introduce yourself first, please.
Thank you very much. There's so much to talk. My name is Basta Ahmed. I'm with the Somali American Peace Council. I really don't know where to start because there's so much to ask these gentlemen here. But I will start first with the Ambassador. In the past, the American policy in the past was the dual-track policy and containment. That's the policy that came out from the United States. Things are evolving, are a little bit changing now for your recognition of the new government. But on the other hand, you have spent $700 million on Amazon. Most of the Somali people, by the way, believe. Of course, we thank the Amazon for fighting Shabab, and we thank them, the African Union. But the fact that you're not building the Somali armed forces, I think we still consider this as a containment. The policy of containment is continuous, and if that doesn't stop, I don't think Somalia will ever see a government. That's for the Ambassador. Mr. Omar, thank you very much for your government, the initiative that they have taken, the British government. We thank you very much. And finally, about the Constitution. I think we have to be very careful about the Constitution. And for the simple fact, without securing the nation, having referendum from the Somali people, passing the Constitution through the parliament, that can divide the nation more, I think we need to secure the nation first before we run into federal system that Somalia has no clue what the heck the federal system is. That's my personal opinion. And United States, which has a very strong institutions, very strong institutions. You see sometimes Texas saying, I'm going to secede from the United States. So talking about federal government in Somalia, regional autonomy, we all for that. I believe in that. But I think we should not push or force the government toward that goal at this particular juncture of our case. Mr. Williams, you evaluated very well when it came to Jubaland and the Kenyan involvement. So my question is, and there is a suspicion among the Somalis that Kenya is interested in a sea in Somalia, that there has been some exploration of oil. Is that a fact or is that rumor? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there another question? All the way in the back on the left side, I see a hand.
Hi, thank you. My name is Abdul Halim Rijal. I'm with the Digital Outreach Team, U.S. Department of State. And my question is, going back to the de-radicalization and fighting Al-Shabaab, it's not only on the ground, but it's the ideology that came from Al-Qaeda and from outside Somalia. As a young Somali said last week, he's a poet from Somaliland, that we don't only get expired medicine and food because there's no governments in those areas, or they don't have a strong government, but we get an expired ideology. So the ideology is what we have to fight, and in many fronts. Last week, I think in Mogadishu, there were this conference about the Somali clerics, 160. Some of them came from outside Somalia. It was a very strong. They denounced Al-Shabaab, and it was the first time that number came. Is there any programs to support so those people, they can shift the ideology of Al-Shabaab?
Thank you very much. And if I can have our sister up front have a question, please.
Yes, I'm very happy to know, and Somalis would be very happy to know that the president of Somalia, the one of Juba, the one of Puntland were together in Brussels. However, I still believe that they are very divided, and not only them, there are other also presidents that have not been brought to Brussels. I'm sure they would have liked to be, but these are the ones that have been recognized by the internationals. However, the main thing is one thing that will lead to success of a responsive Somali government is the issue of who selects or elects parliament. And those are clan elders who do not consider 50% or more of their constituency and not relevant. They consider women are not relevant. And in actuality, that's what we all agreed with them when we are very happy with the process, and we are not stopping them and asking them that question. Where is the 50% who are carrying Somalia on their backs? And that failure, I account it mainly Somali men, but equally international community. Another thing is we talk about infrastructure and building a government. Building a government is not going to work without putting money and resources into infrastructure. infrastructure can bring regions together. They're not connected. They have different lives because of lack of infrastructure. Another element that could really break or make it is helping Somalis to deal with their pain. We all carry our clan pains. We killed each other. We grabbed each other's land. I am one. In Baidawo, I have a house and a farm taken by people. In Mogadishu, I have it. In Erigavo, where I work and my organization works in Somaliland, my house has been sold 3 times. I don't want to deal with it because it might create more conflict if I touch it. And I don't want someone to lose a finger on a property of mine. A lot of Somalis are like that. And I have the least pain. People have to deal with the pain through conflict resolution. And where is that? In documentation, in money, in all these things. That's how we can bring communities together, not presidents who might fall next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll return to the panel for some responses. Clearly a number of questions for you, Ambassador Teitelbaum, but also on the Constitution to you, Keith, and I'll give the others a chance to respond as well. But let me start with you, Ambassador.
Well, from the first statement, it wasn't clear to me that there was actually a question there. But what I will say is that, as I mentioned, in fiscal years 2012 and 13, we had provided, what was the figure? $140 million worth of support to Somali security forces. And as I mentioned, we've just pledged an additional $21 million at Brussels. And frankly, I think we recognize the importance of Somali security forces in making Somalia secure. In fact, the original plans the concept that the numbers of AMISOM alone are not enough to do it has been brought up in another statement by one of my colleagues here. And I think everybody recognizes that at the end of the day, security in Somalia has to come fundamentally from Somalis. I think the fact that regional countries, regional partners, and international partners want to help does not take away the fundamental responsibility from Somalis themselves. And I think what I would say is we are constantly looking at our support to AMISOM and looking at our goals and trying to decide what the best allocation of our limited resources are. I think that if and when it appears that the money is better spent and more effective in working with Somali security forces, we will be making that shift. We've already started providing some, but let me be clear that right now the Somali security institutions are still nascent. They are not necessarily fully united. And I think one of the lessons that the United States government has learned over the years is that providing training or equipment to forces where you haven't had sort of security sector reform, where you don't have a solid foundation to build upon, is not necessarily money well spent. And I think we want to make sure that we spend our money wisely, that we make Somali security forces effective, and that they are forces that they're not only effective against al-Shabaab, but at protecting the Somali people, and that we work with Somalis to build a sustainable, appropriate force that builds the Somalia that Somalis want, not a force that drains resources or creates human rights issues or creates problems in the future. And that's not something you do just by throwing money at the problem. It is complex, but I think we recognize that there has to be a balance, and that balance is a moving target. But we are very much committed to helping the Somali security forces grow and become the forces they need to be to make Somalia a secure place.
Excuse me, I'll try to be as equally as quick. I understood when you introduced yourself in the earlier panel that you spent 35 years in the U.S. 37. So I'm sure there's someone in the audience from Texas. The slogan, the gentleman behind you, the slogan down in Texas is "Don't mess with Texas." It comes out of a historical context. It was an independent country once. Then it was a state. Then it succeeded and went to war against the United States. And now it's a state again. I'm certain, and obviously, and Terry and the ambassador knows, I represent the National Democratic Institute, sir, so I'm a good Democrat. and what the Republican governor is saying and doing, there's some things that I would disagree with. But let me put it to you this way. There are, in our system here, the 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that gave the United States Congress some additional authority that wasn't in the original Constitution with respect to states' rights. We, as the National Democratic Institute, are not pushing federalism on the Somali people. What I was saying, and I'm happy you raised it because I only read half of what I was saying because of time. Let me read it now, though. The federal government has to finalize the ratification of a federal constitution through an inclusive constitutional review process, complete with wide public consultations and civic education in an environment that's seriously challenged by security. You can't rush to do that. So we're not pushing it. However, there is something out there that's calling for elections in 2016. And there were wide public consultations, civic education, television and radio serials that were in place for the interim constitution to come about. So if the Somali people have the determination, or peoples have the determination in 2016 they want to establish a new system that's a federal system, I think they will do it themselves. We don't have to come from 8,000 miles away to tell them what to do.
Omar?
Yeah, just picking up on that point, I think definitely we agree with the idea that it has to be the Somalis who talk amongst themselves to decide what sort of governance system they want. And I agree with the lady's point that just seeing the leaders together in one city doesn't mean that all the problems are solved. But I had a slight issue with the point where you said that security had to happen first. I mean, I think that security definitely needs to keep improving, but I don't think we should pretend that we will be able to solve all of Somalia's security problems between now and 2016. I think that the government has set out a constitutional process which should be followed and should work towards the elections. And this reminds me of a point I wanted to make earlier, when in terms of assessing what a government has done, there's also a part of that which is perception of the population. So the government needs to get its message out about what it's doing and what it's trying to do. You mentioned Texas, but in the UK we have a referendum next year on whether our own Somaliland in Scotland should secede or not. I'm probably going to get in trouble.
You're going to get a lot of mail on that one. Oh, boy.
But whether they will go independent or not, and that's a decision for them. But the government has said that it believes in the unity of the United Kingdom, and it's incumbent upon that government to make a case. So I think this will be the same in Somalia. It's incumbent on the government to set out what the benefits are of a unified, more peaceful Somalia if it wants people to support that.
Paul, any thoughts? Or?
Just very briefly, I mean, I think that's absolutely the right issue. It's up to Somalis to define what their constitution means, what federalism means. But I think the point that I took over here is whose voices are going to get to take part in that conversation. And at the moment, we've had the international community, so-called, listening to only a very small, I think, subset of voices about what that should entail. And I think our challenge as outsiders engaging, hopefully constructively with Somalia, is trying to think how we can best make that the voices that are really listened to greater and more representative of Somalia as a whole. I'm afraid I don't have any insider knowledge on oil concessions, but it's the Norwegian government you need to talk to, I think, who have been brokering some of the talks apparently between the Kenyans and TFG beforehand. And on the point about ideology, absolutely, yeah, the battle against Shabab has been both one on the battlefield and the sort of mental battlefield, as it were. At least from AMISOM's point of view, they got off to a very bad, if not disastrous start, I would say, when it came to engaging in, let's call it, whether it's public diplomacy, strategic communication, whatever label you give it. And I think part of the reason that Shabab became as strong as it did in certain parts of the country was precisely because it wasn't met with a constructive and coherent message from AMISOM in particular as to why they were here as outsiders and why they could help undermine some of the more extremist ideology. And just as an aside, as a researcher, a curious outsider, looking at these issues from 2007 until about 2010, I could get much more interesting information, let's say, from al-Shabaab's websites, YouTube videos, later Twitter feeds and things than I could from Amazon, which was very media shy, very worried about engaging with the in public diplomacy generally. And I think that did hurt it in that attempt to undermine the ideological side of Shabab.
Thank you. Another round of questions. Let me start over here on the aisle, and then I'll come to the middle, and then I'll go back.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. My name is Mohammed Abdurazak. I'm the country director for National Democratic Institute in Somalia. My question is to Ambassador Teitelbaum. The $21 million that you mentioned that the U.S. government has pledged, is that all for security, or is that for governance and other areas as well? Thank you.
There's a short question. Thank you. Let me get to the woman in the black sweater, I suppose. There, yes. Is the
Thanks. I'm Lynn Carter. I'm with Management Systems International. The first speaker on the first panel indicated that an eye-opening percentage of public sector revenue disappeared in the form of corruption. 50 to 70% was the amount that was given. International donors are spending a lot of money. They've made additional huge commitments. Afghanistan's not a very encouraging example. How do you move this much money through low-capacity systems in an insecure environment and ensure some return on investment and not even more deeply embed the corruption that already exists? Thanks.
Thank you for another very important question. Yes, in the middle here. Mm-hmm. You wait for the microphone, please. We're being broadcast.
Yeah, my name is Sharmarke Farah. I'm a consultant with the UN in New York. My question is to Omar. Before the New Deal, there were 2 conferences in London, and one of the key outcomes of these conferences was the Somali Stability Fund, and it was started to be around 350 million, and we've not had any, any news recently. So if there is any, if you can update us on where we are with the Somali Stability Fund.
Thank you. There was clearly a question directly to Ambassador Teitelbaum and one to Omar, and then a general question perhaps any of you might want to address Lynn Carter's question about corruption and low capacity. But why don't I start with you, Ambassador?
Sure. Well, let me give a quick answer to a quick question. That 21 million is indeed only for security. However, the 21 million that was announced was 21 million additional funds, in addition to funds that we had previously announced for security, for development assistance, and for humanitarian assistance. Rest assured that those other areas will receive very substantial amounts of money. Our commitments, financial commitments in Somalia, have in fact been growing rather than shrinking, which is a pretty remarkable thing in this budget environment, and I think it's very reflective of the importance that the U.S. government accords to Somalia. But that 21 million is security only, but it is an additional figure. It's just a small piece of our total package for the coming year.
Well, have you the microphone. Do you have any of the thoughts on the question of corruption and low capacity and how that kind of money can be moved through a place like Somalia?
Yes, it's a fundamental question and a very good one. Let me start out by saying, and without trying to be negative, it's probably a question for the last panel. My friend and colleague Linda Etim was here. Is she still here? Linda, are you here? Because she's the one who can really answer that. What I will say is, I'm not a development assistance expert. And you're absolutely right to point out that there clearly have been problems in delivering large-scale development aid in conflicts and in failed state environments. I don't think anybody will say that this isn't a major challenge. It's a fundamental one. And my sense is that we're learning. We're working on it. We're trying to learn from past mistakes. This is why we have a lot of. We put a lot of effort into monitoring and evaluation, and we're putting a lot of effort into trying to learn from those mistakes so we don't repeat them. How specifically we're doing it is really for our USAID and other experts to talk about. But what I will say is I know we're trying to make use of of our Somali partners where possible. We have a lot of external auditors. It's a challenge that we face every day in almost every one of our programs. And what I'd say is we don't have a single answer, but I don't, and these are real challenges, but I don't think that we view them as so substantial. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. They're not so substantial that we don't want to try and continue to run good programs. And good programs do get run, not just by governments, but by NGOs and others. Good work can be done in Somalia. Let me point out that Somali businesses and civil society operate very effectively in some very, very difficult environments. So I think there are models we can emulate, and there is work. There are things to be learned and work to be done. I'm sorry if that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards about it a little more. Thanks.
Omar, did you have a particular response to the one about the Somali Reconstruction Fund?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just also starting on the sort of corruption point. I mean, I think that certainly has been a problem, but that's part of the reason why we wanted to make public financial management such a big part of the conference in London. And I think that the government did come up with a pretty good plan for reform of their public financial management, and we've put about £3 million towards that plan. But I also think that the New Deal Compact itself also helps with some of this, because if Somalia wants to move along the process set out by the compact, and if it wants to move towards things like greater IFI, international financial institution engagement, or eventually to debt relief, the government knows that they need to get a better handle over the public financial management and corruption. So I think there's a lot of work happening there. And then in terms of a lot of the money that's going in, it's not going in through sort of directly to the government, but through various other funds. On Monday, they announced the Somali Development and Reconstruction Fund, which will be, I forget, managed by the bank or by the UN, but it will have more international monitoring over it. And I think that kind of partnership between the government and the internationals will be important for monitoring that. On the Stability Fund, again, it's probably more for my development colleagues, but we have set that up. It's designed to focus on local reconciliation efforts, particularly on getting active youth engagement with their communities. We've established now the sort of permanent fund secretariat, which will manage the money and the projects, and that's fully operational. And that secretariat is working with the Office of the Prime Minister and with the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Justice to look at which specific programs the money should be put towards. So it is sort of in train now and identifying areas of work, but it's still got some way to go.
Keith, do you have anything?
Just the transparency and accountability, they should mean something as values, not just be words. And the political will that politicians show has to be real. Otherwise, the criticism of this Brussels conference by al-Shabaab will become true, that this money is just going to be eaten by corrupt politicians. And so to the extent that the public trust is violated by corrupt politicians, that's the same extent to which you won't see the establishment of a democratic state. And so I think it's a very serious issue. Obviously, the donor countries that are giving the money have to report back to their people how they spend taxpayers' dollars. And I think what the ambassador said is important, because I know and we have to report on everything. And I would imagine that this isn't just money being given without some reporting mechanisms being attached to them. But at the end of the day, it is political will and the commitment to the people's trust that politicians have to adhere to. And I think I'm one that gives them a hard time. Politicians do have a hard time. But in a situation like this, it's really important because if you're eating the money, what about the people who don't even have a chance really at life? That is being wasted. And it's, as we all agree, however difficult this situation is, it's the best opportunity to move the country forward in years.
Any thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, just on corruption, it's not just an insider's problem. Unfortunately, so Amazon, which I'm focusing on, has got to be above reproach, basically, and it hasn't been. There's been allegations, not all of them investigated through a process, but allegations of Amazon soldiers selling rations and items, equipment items, even ammunition, sometimes to members of Somali security forces under the TFG. Sometimes the allegations are that it's even gone to other forces outside of that. But just recently as well, the Ugandans are sending home about 24 troops from AMISOM, including the Sector 1 contingent commander, on allegations of corruption. And again, who knows what the process will be that they go through. But that's been a real dent. I would say the sympathetic version is when you drop a force like AMISOM into a political environment, as you just described, how do you operate without having at least some relationship with that type of activity? It must be very difficult to avoid it completely. But as an external force going there, as I said, really we need them to be above reproach and make sure that if there are these allegations, they're going to damage the mission one way or another, either because they're not proven, then they become part of the rumor mill and it just persists that this is a corrupt force, or we proved correct and that they were engaging in corrupt activities, and that again is not helpful.
I think we still just have a very few questions. Very few minutes rather. Let me start by asking my boss here.
Steve McDonald, Africa Program, Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm going to pick up on something that Fatima mentioned, but wasn't picked up by anybody, and it reflects a trend that I too often have seen over the years of involvement in conflicts and post-conflict situations in Africa, and that is, I'm hearing a lot, very necessarily, about the building of security, securing the atmosphere in which we all have to operate there, of looking at development issues, of institution building, writing the Constitution, planning for elections in 2016 or whenever they will come about, and et cetera. We all look at these items, and sometimes we forget to remember the human factor. We don't pick up on the need for reconciliation, the need for building of trust, communications, of the capacity of peoples to collaborate and work together. I've heard nothing about that in anything anybody has said this morning, and would just like to throw that open to the whole panel for comment. If anything's being done on that, I'd be very happy to hear about it. And I mean this at the highest levels of government, as well as at the clan and the local levels, et cetera. This is not just a community issue. It's the ability of governments to work together, government officials to work together, of differing clan structures to work together to make this society, this peace that we're all hoping for, sustainable.
Thank you. Did I miss this question in the light blue shirt? And then I'm going to only take two this time because we're just about out of time.
Yes, thanks. Maybe this question.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Shuaib, based in DC, working for Relief International. Just a quick question regarding the military assistance, and as we know, that the former government, when regarding to the report that was published by the UN in terms of regarding the munitions, most of the ammunition that was found in the market, in Mogadishu market, was reported as it was the AMISOM stocks, and this is ways that people they looked at as ammunition was became a choice, a currency of choice. What do you say with the current government now we have? How's that? How are we handling to prevent that? And yeah, going back to that ammunition that you pointed earlier.
I'm going to go and go back to the panel because we just have about 3 more minutes to give you a chance to comment, and both either directly on the question of the human factor or this question of military assistance. And I'll start with you, Ambassador.
Okay. I think these are both substantial and very interesting questions. I think the issue of reconciliation is clearly critical. When I was speaking earlier, I tried to emphasize that although there's a lot of very high-profile focus on security, as I said, I don't view security as actually the biggest challenge that faces Somalia. It really is governance and reconciliation, and you know, it's only that security is the most immediate issue. And you know, and I don't want to say that you have to have security. This came up a little bit earlier. You can't have governance. You can't have improvement in other areas without complete security. I think you have to move forward on both. But it's clear that without improvements in security, without a certain baseline of security, your ability to make progress in all these other areas that we've talked about is likely to be substantially limited. What I will say is you know, I'm not a scholar of Somali history, but I think that Somalis have a remarkable ability to be practical, to reach accommodations with each other. And I really do believe that Somalis, if put together in the right circumstances, will reach their own methods of reconciliation and will find those. And I think that it's too easy as outsiders to say, well, great, let's hold a conference, you know, and to try and impose some idea from the outside that can be well-intentioned. I think the history of this sort of thing, particularly in Somalia, is that those well-intentioned external good ideas don't tend to produce an awful lot. So what I would say is that certainly, you know, on the part of my own government, I can't speak for others, but I will conjecture that, you know, I think at both local and community levels and higher levels, as Somalis have and develop their own concepts for how to move forward on reconciliation, I think we're all interested in hearing. You know, we're not wedded to just, you know, again, this is meant, and it's something that came out of Brussels and the New Deal. We want to be in a listening mode over how we can be helpful to Somalia. And I agree. I think that this issue of reconciliation is fundamental. But since our colleague said earlier, saying, look, huge numbers of Somalis may feel excluded by the early part of the process, I think, again, I guess what I would say is we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The process is imperfect, but as many of my friends would say, you know, we don't live in a paradise or in heaven. We live on an imperfect earth. We live in the dunya, not a paradise, and we make mistakes. But that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility to try and address these issues and improve them, and that as Somalia moves forward, to be legitimate, to have processes that work, to have reconciliation that works, all parties have to be involved, which is very much a Somali tradition. You know, the right of inclusion. So thank you very much.
Keith, yes, thanks. And I wanted to address Steve's question. As I said earlier, national reconciliation and healing, especially at the local level, has to take place because there's no way for you to have competitive politics if it doesn't. And it can't be a mechanical, we have to do this first and then we'll do that. My view is that when you look at Africa, there's been peace and reconciliation processes in South Africa and Liberia. There are peace and reconciliation processes unfolding right now in Kenya and Zimbabwe and Cote d'Ivoire. Maybe there are things that can be gleaned from that process, but one thing that certainly can't is that it has to be implemented together. So I would associate myself with what the ambassador just said.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think particularly the New Deal process is something which will bring in more of this consultation. I mentioned earlier the Stability Fund, which is targeted primarily also at sort of local level reconciliation efforts. But I know that we as UK want to step up efforts on supporting reconciliation and on the constitutional review process in the coming months, and that includes sort of promoting political dialogue and engagement directly with some of the regions outside of Mogadishu to try and support that process. And I think some of the work also that DFID is doing in sort of building up the core functions of government can help some of this process as well in terms of building the capacity of the government to make that sort of outreach. And we've actually been supporting through NDI and through UNDP a sort of outreach strategy for Parliament and to help some of the regional constituency offices of MPs so that they can do some of this work on a more local level as well.
Paul.
On the ammunition question, yeah, the UN Monitoring Group report on Somalia and Eritrea made this point for a number of years, basically that stocks of ammunition from the AMISOM stock had been ending up in other places than AMISOM. I mean, I think that goes to the broader point I raised about the mission's command and control, keeping a hierarchy, keeping obviously in check its own ordnance stocks, and that's a process that's ongoing. On the reconciliation point, yeah, you may have seen on the way in there was a publication that a number of us in the room worked on about putting, when it comes to US engagement with the Horn of Africa, putting conflict resolution and reconciliation at local, regional, provincial and national levels front and center in the US policies, and we think there's room for improvement on that score, and I think Somalia would be a a sort of key example of that. And finally, someone has dropped their wallet.
No corruption.
No
Did you see
corruption
that?
here.
Did
No.
you see that? Extraordinary. Let me use that final thought there, penultimate thought there from Paul to note the very excellent report that he was the primary drafter of on the Horn of Africa that was available out front and is also unavailable on the Wilson Center's website. Please join me in thanking the panel and thanking the Wilson